Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet History Vault. Tonight we step quietly into the long winter night of the American frontier, where the wind moves through dark forests and the stars hang bright above cabins that glow faintly in the distance. You arrive after a day of travel that has left your boots stiff with frozen mud and your fingers tingling from the cold. The world around you is vast, silent, and far colder than you imagined, while reading about it from the comfort of modern life. The trees stand like watchful giants, the air smells faintly of wood smoke, and somewhere nearby, a cabin door creaks open just enough to spill a ribbon of amber firelight onto the snow. You step closer, already sensing that the real challenge of frontier life does not always happen during daylight. It happens at night. During the 19th century, thousands of families moved westward across North America, hoping to build farms, towns, and new futures in territories that could be beautiful but brutally unforgiving. Nights on the frontier were not simply quiet hours of rest. They were a test of preparation, patience, and sometimes pure stubbornness. You probably will not survive this experience very comfortably, at least not without learning a few tricks first. Inside the cabin, the warmth feels like a small miracle. The smell of burning oak drifts from the hearth, mingling with the earthy scent of wool blankets drying near the fire. Someone has been cooking earlier, and the faint aroma of stew still lingers in the air. You stamp the snow from your boots and feel the floorboards beneath you creak softly, worn smooth by years of footsteps. Log cabins like this one were the most common form of housing for early frontier settlers. A mainstream historical detail that often surprises people is just how quickly many of these homes were built. A determined family with a few neighbours helping could raise a simple cabin in a matter of days. The structure might not be elegant, but thick logs stacked and sealed with clay or moss could offer a surprisingly sturdy shelter against wind and snow. Still sturdy does not mean comfortable. You glance towards the small window where frost has already begun to lace the edges of the glass. Outside, the temperature continues to fall as night deepens. Inside the cabin there is warmth near the fire, but farther from the hearth the air grows cooler with every step. You can feel it brushing against your cheeks like invisible fingers. It is time to prepare for sleep. On the frontier, sleeping through a cold night requires planning that begins long before anyone closes their eyes. Firewood must be stacked. The hearth must be arranged so the flames will last as long as possible. Bedding must be placed carefully, often as close to the fire as the family can manage without risking sparks. And even then the night can still be long. You notice that the room is not divided into bedrooms the way modern houses are. Most frontier cabins contained only one main room where everything happened. Cooking, eating, working, and sleeping all took place within the same walls. During winter, this arrangement had one big advantage. Every bit of warmth stayed concentrated in one space. You move closer to the hearth and stretch your hands toward the flames. The fire crackles softly. Occasionally a log shifts, sending a quick burst of sparks upward through the chimney. The sound is comforting in a way that feels almost hypnotic. The family who lives here moves around with quiet efficiency. A woman folds thick quilts and places them near a wooden bed frame. A man adds another log to the fire, watching carefully as the flames catch. Children move sleepily across the room, rubbing their eyes, but still aware that bedtime preparations are serious business during winter. One quirky historical detail that sometimes appears in diaries from the frontier is that some settlers warmed stones near the fireplace before bed. These heated stones were wrapped in cloth and tucked under blankets to create a primitive form of bed warmer. It was not perfect. Sometimes the stones cooled quickly. Occasionally someone misjudged the heat and ended up with scorched fabric, but on a bitter night even a little extra warmth could make a difference. You watch as one of the older children carefully places a warmed stone near the foot of the bed. The gesture is practiced and careful. Clearly this is not their first winter. The firelight flickers across the walls, revealing the rough texture of the logs. Tiny gaps between them have been filled with a mixture of clay and straw known as chinking. It helps block the wind, though no cabin on the frontier is ever completely airtight. A faint whistle of wind slips through somewhere in the structure, a quiet reminder that nature is always pressing against these fragile human shelters. Historians still debate how comfortable these early cabins truly were during the harshest winters. Some accounts describe nights that felt almost cozy with a roaring fire and thick bedding. Other journals speak of frost forming on the inside walls and families waking with ice on their blankets. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, depending on the skill of the builders, the quality of the firewood, and the mercy of the weather. You notice how everyone in the room moves closer together as bedtime approaches. Not dramatically, just a subtle gathering near the warmest part of the cabin. It makes sense when you think about it. Human bodies generate heat, and on the frontier warmth is a resource just like food or firewood. Families learned quickly that sleeping close together helped everyone survive colder nights. Privacy becomes a luxury that can wait for another century. The fire settles into a steady glow, now casting long shadows that sway gently across the ceiling beams. Outside, the wind rises briefly, rustling the branches of nearby trees. The sound drifts through the cracks of the cabin walls like a distant whisper. You pull a wool blanket around your shoulders and feel its rough fibres scratch slightly against your neck. It smells faintly of lanolin and smoke. Not exactly spa quality, but it holds warmth well. The family begins to arrange bedding on wooden frames and simple pallets on the floor. Tomorrow will bring another long day of work, but tonight the priority is something far simpler. Stay warm, stay safe, and hopefully sleep. You settle near the hearth where the last glow of the fire spreads gentle heat across the room. The night outside continues to deepen, but inside the cabin there is a small island of warmth surrounded by wilderness. Soon you will learn exactly how pioneers built their beds, what they stuffed inside their mattresses, and why every layer of blanket mattered. But for now you simply listen. The crackle of the fire, the quiet breathing of the room, and the distant wind moving through the endless dark frontier. The warmth from the hearth lingers on your skin as the room settles into its slower nighttime rhythm. Outside, the wind slips through the trees with a hollow sound that seems to stretch across the dark forest. Inside the cabin, every movement becomes softer, more deliberate, as if the entire family understands that the walls around them must now hold back the long cold hours until morning. You glance again at those walls. Up close, they are not as solid as they first appeared. Each log is thick and heavy, stacked carefully one atop another, their curved shapes fitting together like pieces of an enormous wooden puzzle. The surfaces are rough beneath your fingers, ridged and slightly splintered, still carrying the faint scent of pine sap that lingers even years after the tree has been cut. Log cabins like this one became a defining image of the American frontier, though the idea did not originate in North America at all. A widely accepted historical fact is that the design was introduced by Scandinavian settlers in the 17th century, particularly in areas like Delaware and Pennsylvania. Their building techniques spread gradually westward as settlers moved deeper into the continent. By the time pioneers were pushing into frontier territories during the early 19th century, the log cabin had become the practical solution for families who needed shelter quickly. And quickly was the key word. You imagine the moment this cabin first stood here. Trees falling under the bite of axes, logs dragged into place by teams of neighbours, notches carved at the ends so the logs would lock together at the corners. The entire structure rising in a flurry of cooperation, because survival on the frontier rarely happened alone. The walls in front of you tell that story silently. Between the logs you notice the pale lines of chinking. That mixture of clay, mud, straw, and sometimes even animal hair has been pressed firmly into the gaps to block drafts. Without it, the wind would pour straight through the walls. Even with it, the cabin still breathes cold air in tiny whispers. You feel one of those whispers now against your ankle. The fire pops quietly behind you, reminding you that warmth here is never something you take for granted. A cabin wall is not just a wall. It is the thin line between comfort and a winter night that could easily turn dangerous. A faint rattling sound touches the roof as the wind strengthens outside. The wooden shingles shift slightly, settling again with a soft creak. Everything about the structure feels alive in a way modern houses rarely do. It flexes and responds to the weather as if the cabin itself is listening to the storm. The man of the house walks along one wall, running his hand slowly across the seams between logs. He pauses at one spot and presses more clay into a narrow crack, smoothing it with practiced movements. Draft control is serious business tonight. You notice how the children instinctively move their bedding farther from the wall and closer to the centre of the room. No one announces the decision. It simply happens the way habits form when a family has spent enough winters learning what works. One curious detail recorded in a few frontier journals mentions that some settlers stuffed extra moss into cabin cracks during particularly cold months. Moss was surprisingly good at trapping air, which made it a natural insulator. Of course, this solution sometimes came with a small downside. In springtime, when the weather warmed and the moss dried out, it occasionally fell out of the walls in dusty green clumps. Imagine waking one morning with bits of forest drifting gently onto your breakfast table. Still, when winter winds howl across open land, a little moss shedding later in the year probably feels like a fair trade. The room grows quieter as the family continues preparing for bed. Someone hangs a thick blanket across the inside of the door. It sways slightly as it settles, creating a soft barrier that helps keep cold air from sliding across the floor. You would not necessarily think of a blanket as part of the architecture of a house, But on the frontier, anything that stops wind becomes part of the building itself. Scholars have long discussed how effective these early cabins truly were against harsh winters. Some researchers suggest that well-built log walls provided excellent insulation because wood traps air inside its fibres. Others argue that the many cracks and loose fittings often made cabins far draftier than modern people might expect. The question remains open in historical discussion since conditions varied enormously depending on who built the structure and what materials were available nearby. Standing here now, you can feel both sides of that argument at once. The warmth near the fire is undeniable, almost cozy. But just a few steps away, the air grows noticeably sharper, reminding you that the cold outside is patient and persistent. You glance upward toward the roof beams. Thick wooden rafters stretch across the ceiling like the ribs of a giant creature. Above them sits the loft, a simple upper space where additional sleeping pallets might be placed if the family grows larger or takes in guests. Heat rises, of course, and that loft sometimes becomes the warmest place in the cabin during winter nights. Of course, it also collects smoke if the chimney does not draw properly, so the choice between warmth and fresh air becomes an interesting balancing act. You take a slow breath and smell the mixture of wood smoke, wool clay, and faint traces of the outdoors carried in by boots and coats. It is not unpleasant. In fact, it feels oddly grounding, like the scent of survival itself. The firelight flickers along the logs, revealing subtle tool marks left behind by the axes that shaped them. Each groove represents effort. Each scar on the wood tells a quiet story about the day this cabin was built. Outside, the wind slides around the corners of the structure and presses briefly against the walls. The cabin answers with a soft creaking sound, as though acknowledging the presence of the cold but refusing to surrender to it. Inside, the family continues their quiet preparations. Bedding is moved closer to the hearth. Blankets are layered. The door curtain is adjusted again. You realize something important in this moment. The frontier cabin is not a fortress. It does not completely block the cold. Instead, it slows it down, buying time through the night, while fire blankets and human warmth do the rest. The wind outside rises once more, whispering through the trees. But the walls hold, for now, and soon you will see how pioneers built their beds within these walls, turning ropes, boards, and simple craftsmanship into places where entire families hope to sleep through the longest winter nights. The fire crackles again behind you, sending another warm wave across the room as the first bedding frames are pulled into place. The night is only beginning. The fire becomes the center of everything once the cabin walls have done all they can. You feel this truth almost immediately as the room gradually arranges itself around the hearth like planets orbiting a quiet sun. The glow spreads across the wooden floorboards and climbs the log walls in gentle waves of amber light. Even the shadows seem warmer here. You move a little closer to the hearth, noticing how the heat fades with every step away from it. On the frontier, warmth is not evenly distributed. It gathers in small pockets wherever fire manages to hold its ground against the cold. The fireplace itself is larger than you might expect. Rough stones form its sides, stacked and mortared together into a wide opening that could easily swallow several heavy logs at once. The chimney climbs upward through the roof in a column of dark stone, carrying smoke into the night sky where it dissolves among the stars. A well-built hearth was one of the most important features of any frontier cabin. Historical records show that fireplaces often served multiple purposes beyond heating. Families cooked meals over the flames, boiled water in iron kettles, dried damp clothing near the coals, and even used the hearth's light for evening tasks like mending clothes or repairing tools. You can imagine the entire day orbiting this one spot. Now as night deepens, its role becomes even more critical. The man kneels near the fire and nudges one of the logs with an iron poker. Sparks lift, briefly dancing upward before vanishing into the chimney. He watches carefully, judging the fire the way a sailor might read the wind. Too much flame and the wood will burn out quickly. Too little and the room will grow cold before midnight. Managing the fire through its night is a delicate skill. You settle onto a wooden stool nearby and extend your hands toward the warmth. The sensation spreads slowly through your fingers, easing the stiffness left behind by the cold outside. The smell of burning oak fills the air with a deep, almost sweet scent that mixes with the faint tang of ash. It is oddly calming. A practical fact often mentioned in frontier accounts is that hardwoods such as oak, hickory or maple were highly valued for nighttime fires because they burned slowly and produced steady heat. Softer woods like pine ignited quickly but disappeared just as fast, leaving families scrambling for more fuel before dawn. You notice that the logs stacked beside the hearth are thick and heavy, each one carefully split and arranged earlier in the day. Firewood preparation was constant work on the frontier. A single winter could require several cords of wood, which meant countless hours of chopping and hauling long before snow ever touched the ground. Every piece stacked here represents a bit of insurance against the cold. The flames shift again as the man adjusts another log. This time he places it partly across the glowing coals rather than directly into the flames. The log catches, slowly releasing warmth without roaring too brightly. You realize he is preparing the fire for the long night ahead. There is even a name for this practice among many frontier families. They called it banking the fire. By arranging the logs carefully and sometimes covering parts of the embers with ash settlers, could slow the burn enough to keep heat lingering until morning. A few glowing coals at dawn meant the difference between quickly relighting the hearth or struggling to start a fire from scratch while your breath turned white in the frozen air. One strange detail, occasionally mentioned in earlier American folklore, claims that some households believed a fire should never completely die overnight because it was considered bad luck. Whether that belief came from superstition or simple practicality is hard to say. Either way, most families did everything possible to keep at least a faint glow alive beneath the ashes. You watch the fire settle into a quieter rhythm now. The sharp flames soften, replaced by a deep red glow that pulses gently beneath the logs. It is less dramatic, but far more dependable. The room responds immediately. The warmth spreads outward again, touching the nearby bedding, and warming the wooden bed frames that have been placed within its reach. The children drift closer, drawn instinctively toward the hearth's comforting heat. You notice something else too. The firelight creates a shifting dance of shadows along the cabin ceiling. Every flicker reveals the shapes of tools hanging on the walls, an axe near the door, a lantern resting on a shelf, a kettle suspended on a hook over the flames. These objects are part of the quiet ecosystem that allows this family to survive winter nights here. Historians continue to discuss how heavily frontier life depended on maintaining reliable fire. Some argue that the hearth served as the emotional center of the home as much as the physical one. Others suggest that its importance was purely practical, a tool like any other. Perhaps the truth blends both ideas. When you sit near the warmth on a cold night, it is hard not to feel a certain comfort that goes beyond simple survival. The fire crackles again, louder this time, and a small piece of wood collapses inward with a soft clatter. The man adjusts the poker once more and nods quietly to himself. Satisfied, around the room bedding preparations continue. A wooden bed frame stands near the wall, its ropes stretched tightly beneath a thin mattress. On the floor nearby, simple pallets made from blankets and straw sacks are being arranged for the children. Every sleeping place is positioned with careful attention to the hearth. Too far away and the cold will creep in. Too close and sparks might land where they should not. You watch as one of the women drapes a thick quilt over the edge of the bed frame. The fabric catches the firelight, revealing faded patches sewn together from pieces of older clothing. Each square carries its own story. The warmth continues to drift outward from the hearth, though you already sense how slowly it fades as it reaches the far corners of the cabin. This is the quiet truth of frontier nights. The fire works tirelessly. The cabin walls do their best, but the real battle against the cold will be fought in the beds themselves, where ropes, wooden frames, and handmade mattresses wait to cradle tired bodies through the long winter darkness. You lean a little closer to the fire and listen to the steady breathing of the room. Soon the beds will be ready, and you will discover how pioneers built them from whatever the wilderness allowed. The warmth of the hearth spreads gently across the room as the family begins arranging the places where everyone will sleep. You notice immediately that beds here are not the polished furniture pieces you might imagine in later centuries. They are practical structures, built with the same straightforward determination that raised the cabin itself. One of the bed frames stands nearest the fire. It is made from thick wooden posts joined together with simple pegs instead of nails. The wood still carries a faint scent of sap, and its surface is uneven where an axe rather than a saw shaped it. Nothing about the frame is decorative. It exists for one reason only: to hold a mattress above the cold floor. You walk a little closer and see the ropes. They run back and forth across the frame in a tight woven pattern, stretching from one side of the bed to the other like a giant web. The ropes sag slightly beneath their own weight, but have been pulled firm enough to create a flexible surface. This is what many pioneers called a rope bed. A widely accepted historical detail explains that rope beds were common throughout colonial America and continue to appear on the frontier well into the 19th century. The ropes formed the support for the mattress, and families regularly tightened them to prevent the bed from sagging too deeply. If you ever hear someone say "sleep tight," there is a good chance the phrase traces its roots to this practice of pulling bed ropes tighter before lying down for the night. You reach down and press a hand against the woven cords. They give slightly beneath your palm, then push back with quiet strength. It is not the plush comfort of a modern mattress, but it has a certain practical logic. Nearby, the father picks up a wooden tool shaped like a short stick and begins twisting one of the ropes. With each turn, the cord grows taut, lifting the webbed surface of the bed a little higher. The ropes creak softly as they stretch. You hear him mutter something about the ropes loosening during the past week. Beds like this required frequent adjustment. Moisture in the air could cause ropes to slacken. Children jumping on the bed might pull them out of alignment. Even the steady weight of sleepers night after night could slowly stretch the fibers. Maintaining the bed became just another small task folded into daily frontier life. Not every family owned enough rope beds for everyone, though. As you glance across the room, you notice simpler arrangements taking shape on the floor. 2 thick blankets have been spread out near the hearth, and on top of them lies a long cloth sack filled with straw. This will become another sleeping place for the night. Floor pallets like these were extremely common in frontier homes, especially when families grew large or when travellers stopped by unexpectedly. Children often slept on these simple beds, which could be rolled up and stored during the day to free space for other activities. You imagine waking in the morning and folding the bedding away while the cabin returns to its daytime routine of cooking and work. One unusual frontier habit recorded in several early American letters involved suspending small beds from the ceiling beams using ropes. These hanging beds swayed gently like hammocks and kept sleepers away from cold drafts that crept along the floor. They were not especially common, but when they appeared, they must have made nighttime in a tiny cabin feel almost like sleeping aboard a quiet ship. The thought makes you smile slightly as you watch the room continue its transformation into a sleeping space. The mother moves toward the rope bed and spreads a thick mattress across the woven cords. It lands with a soft thump and settles into the pattern beneath it. The mattress looks bulky and uneven, its shape determined by whatever materials lie hidden inside. You will soon learn that frontier mattresses were rarely filled with anything as luxurious as modern stuffing. Instead, they relied on whatever the local environment offered. But for now, the important thing is simply that the bed stands ready. A question that occasionally appears in discussions of early frontier housing concerns how comfortable these beds truly were. Some historians suggest that rope beds provided decent support when properly tightened, while others believe they could sag so much that sleepers rolled toward the middle during the night. Personal diaries offer mixed impressions, which means the truth probably depended heavily on how carefully the bed was maintained. You imagine lying down on those ropes after a long day of chopping wood or hauling water. Perhaps comfort becomes a secondary concern when exhaustion arrives. The fire crackles again behind you and its warmth continues drifting outward across the room. The light catches the edges of the bed frame and paints the ropes in soft amber lines. The entire scene feels quiet and methodical, as though every movement follows a routine practiced many times before. The children now settle their own bedding. One spreads another straw-filled sack near the foot of the rope bed. Another lays out a folded blanket that will serve as both mattress and cover. They move quickly but carefully aware that the firelight is fading slowly as the flames shrink to steady embers. Night on the frontier does not encourage unnecessary delay. You notice something else as the beds take shape. No one is placing their sleeping spot near the outer walls of the cabin. Even with the fire glowing steadily, the cold air tends to gather along those edges where the logs meet the night. Instead, the sleeping places form a loose circle around the hearth, leaving the coldest corners of the cabin empty. It is a quiet strategy born from experience. The father gives the ropes one final twist and nods with satisfaction. The bed now stands firm and ready. He brushes his hands together and glances toward the fire, measuring the slow rhythm of the coals. Soon the room will grow darker. Soon everyone will lie down. But before that happens, one more detail of frontier comfort must be prepared. The mattresses themselves, filled with materials gathered from fields, forests and farms, will soon reveal how pioneers tried to soften the hardness of rope beds and wooden floors. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders and watch the final bedding arrangements unfold beside the warm glow of the hearth. The long winter night continues to inferno outside, and inside the cabin the beds are almost ready. The beds now stand ready, but as you look more closely at the mattresses resting upon them, you realize that they are not quite what you expected. They do not have the neat symmetry of modern bedding. Their shapes are irregular, slightly lumpy in places, and their surfaces carry faint creases where the stuffing inside has shifted over time. You press gently on the nearest one. The mattress sinks beneath your hand, then pushes back, slowly releasing a dry rustling sound from within. It feels softer than bare ropes, certainly, but it is far from luxurious. Still, after a day spent working outdoors in the cold, even this modest comfort must feel like a reward. Frontier mattresses were rarely made from factory materials. Instead, settlers filled large cloth sacks known as idders with whatever natural stuffing they could gather locally. One widely recorded historical reality is that straw was among the most common fillings used across early American settlements. Straw was plentiful, inexpensive, and easy to replace when it became worn or flattened. The sack beneath your hand contains exactly that. You can almost smell it through the fabric, a faint dry scent of harvested grain and sun-warmed fields. The straw shifts as the mattress settles again, redistributing itself into small ridges and hollows that reflect years of use. But straw was only one option. The mother lifts another mattress from a wooden chest and spreads it carefully across the rope bed near the hearth. This one feels different when she presses it flat, softer, more pliable. Inside it holds feathers. Feather beds were highly valued on the frontier whenever families could afford them. Goose or duck feathers created a mattress that moulded gently to the shape of the body, trapping warm air and providing a far more comfortable sleep than straw alone. You imagine sinking into one of those feather beds after a long winter day. The thought feels wonderfully inviting. Still, feather beds had their own challenges. They required constant fluffing to prevent the feathers from clumping into dense pockets. Moisture could seep inside the ticking and cause unpleasant odours if the mattress was not aired properly. And of course, feathers were not always easy to obtain in large quantities, which meant that many families relied on other materials. Nearby, you notice a smaller mattress resting on the floor pallet prepared for one of the children. Its surface is slightly stiffer than the others. When the child sits on it, the mattress gives a crunchy rustle rather than the soft hush of feathers. That sound tells you it is filled with corn husks. Corn was grown widely across frontier farms, and the dried husks left behind after harvest turned out to be surprisingly useful bedding material. When stuffed into mattress ticks, they created a springy cushion that held warmth better than bare straw. Of course, corn husk mattresses had a distinctive personality of their own. Every movement produced a quiet crackling sound like walking through autumn leaves. Some settlers even joked that a restless sleeper on a corn husk mattress could keep the entire cabin awake. The thought makes you glance around the room with a small smile. Another curious historical tidbit appears in a few pioneer recollections describing mattresses filled with dried leaves gathered from the forest floor. Oak leaves in particular were sometimes used because they held their shape longer than softer varieties. Imagine sleeping each night on what was essentially a carefully packed pilot of autumn foliage. The wilderness offered what it could, and settlers learned to adapt. A lingering discussion among historians focuses on just how comfortable these mattresses truly were. Some personal letters describe frontier beds as surprisingly pleasant once the body adjusted to them. Others portray sleepless nights, filled with poking straw stems and shifting lumps of stuffing. The experiences likely varied greatly depending on the materials available and how carefully the mattress had been prepared. You watch as the mother pats down the featherbed once more, smoothing the ticking with practiced hands. The feathers inside redistribute themselves with a soft sighing sound. The children gather their blankets next. Heavy wool quilts are folded over the mattresses, their surfaces stitched from dozens of fabric patches salvaged from worn clothing. Each piece carries its own faded pattern, little fragments of family history sewn together into a blanket designed to trap warmth through the night. Quilting itself became an important household skill across many frontier communities. Women often stitched these blankets by hand during long winter evenings, when outdoor work slowed and the firelight offered enough illumination for careful sewing. The quilt nearest you displays squares of deep blue, dull red, and soft brown cloth arranged in a pattern that seems both practical and oddly beautiful. You run your fingers lightly across its surface and feel the raised lines of stitching beneath the fabric. Even the blankets carry stories here. Across the room, the father lifts one of the straw-filled ticks and gives it a quick shake before placing it on a pallet. The straw inside shifts again, redistributing itself to create a slightly more even surface. These mattresses required regular maintenance. Straw flattened with time and needed replacing every few months. Corn husks gradually broke down into softer fragments. Featherbeds demanded frequent airing to keep them fresh. Sleep on the frontier depended not only on the bed frame but on the constant care of everything that rested upon it. The fire glows steadily now, bathing the room in a quiet amber light. Outside, the wind has settled slightly, though the forest still murmurs in the darkness beyond the cabin walls. Inside, the beds finally appear ready. Straw rustles softly as one of the children climbs onto a pallet. The feather bed near the hearth settles with a deeper, more cushioned sigh as another family member tests its warmth. You pull the blanket tighter around yourself and notice how the air grows cooler with every step away from the fire. Soon everyone will gather closer together beneath those quilts. Because on a frontier night like this, the beds alone are not enough. The real warmth often comes from something simpler, from sleeping close. The mattresses are in place now, the quilts folded and ready, and the fire has settled into its steady nighttime glow. Yet one thing becomes immediately clear as everyone prepares to lie down. The cabin contains far fewer beds than people. At first, this might seem surprising, especially if you're used to modern homes where every person usually has their own sleeping space. But on the frontier, comfort and privacy often gave way to practicality. The room you stand in serves as kitchen, workshop, dining hall, and bedroom all at once. Space must be used carefully. You watch as the family begins arranging themselves around the hearth. The rope bed near the fire will hold 2 adults. The feather mattress spreads across its surface like a soft island of warmth, but even that generous cushion is not meant for just one sleeper. The quilts are pulled wide enough to cover 2 bodies, possibly 3, if a small child slips in during the coldest hours of the night. On the floor nearby, the straw pallets welcome the children. They lie close enough together that their blankets nearly touch. When the fire burns low and the cold creeps closer to the centre of the room, the warmth from their bodies will help protect each other. This way of sleeping was extremely common in frontier households. Families simply could not afford to dedicate large areas of their cabin to separate beds. The arrangement also had a useful side effect during winter. Bodies gathered close together created a pocket of shared heat that helped everyone stay warmer through the night. You imagine the quiet practicality behind this arrangement. No one delivers a lecture explaining the benefits of body warmth. Experience has already taught them what works. The youngest child crawls onto a pallet and curls beneath a quilt almost immediately. You hear the soft rustle of straw shifting beneath the mattress tick as the child settles into the place. Another child lies down beside them, pulling the blanket higher around their shoulders. Soon the rope bed creaks gently as the adults climb beneath the heavy quilt. The ropes stretch slightly under their weight and then hold firm. The entire room now resembles a small cluster of sleepers arranged carefully around the hearth. A frequently mentioned historical observation describes how shared sleeping was the norm in many early American homes, not only on the frontier but in towns and villages as well. Beds were valuable furniture items and families often made the most of them by allowing several people to share the same space. Even visitors might find themselves tucked into a crowded bed if a storm forced them to stay overnight. The idea might sound unusual to modern ears, but for those living here it simply made sense. You notice how the sleeping spots form a loose ring around the fire. No one has chosen the corners of the room. Those places remain darker and noticeably colder even with the embers glowing steadily. Instead, the sleepers gravitate toward the centre where the warmth still lingers. One curious anecdote recorded in an old frontier memoir describes how some families jokingly referred to this arrangement as forming a human stove. The warmth of multiple sleepers gathered beneath thick quilts created a shared heat source that helped offset the loss of warmth from the fading fire. It may sound humorous, so there is real logic behind the idea. As the night progresses and the embers cool, the blankets trap the heat created by everyone beneath them. The effect is surprisingly powerful. You move quietly to one side of the room and notice how the air grows colder near the outer wall. The logs block much of the wind, yet the cold still presses inward through tiny seams and cracks. Back near the centre, however, the atmosphere feels gentler. The fire glows softly. The quilts rise and fall with the breathing of those already settling into sleep. You begin to understand how carefully these families arrange themselves each night. There is another interesting discussion among historians about how these sleeping arrangements shaped family life. Some researchers believe that shared sleeping spaces strengthened family bonds and created a strong sense of closeness among household members. Others suggest that the lack of privacy sometimes led to tension or discomfort, especially as children grew older. The truth probably varied widely from one cabin to the next. Some families may have found comfort in the closeness, while others quietly wished for more space. The fire pops softly again, drawing your attention back to the hearth. A small cloud of sparks drifts upward before disappearing into the chimney. The glow of the embers paints the room in shades of deep red and amber. The adults shift slightly beneath their quilt, adjusting the blankets around their shoulders. The rope bed creaks once more and then grows still. One of the children whispers something drowsy to the other, their voices barely audible above the faint crackle of the fire. Soon even those whispers fade. The cabin settles. Outside, the wind brushes gently against the roof and moves on through the trees. Somewhere far off, an owl calls into the night, its low sound echoing across the frozen forest. Inside, the warmth from the hearth slowly weakens, but the cluster of sleeping bodies now carries its own quiet heat. You pull the blanket around yourself and lie down near the edge of the group, feeling the warmth drifting from the nearby quilts. It is not luxurious. It is not perfectly comfortable, but it works. And on a frontier night, working warmth is exactly what matters most. The room grows quieter with every passing minute. The breathing of the sleepers becomes steady, blending with the soft ticking sounds of the fire settling into deeper embers. Soon another layer of protection will reveal itself, because the quilts alone are not the only defense against the cold. What pioneers wear to bed matters just as much as the blankets that cover them. The room has grown quieter now, but the preparations for the night are not quite finished. Before anyone truly settles into sleep, one last layer of protection must be arranged. You notice that no one climbs into bed wearing the same clothes they wore while working outside. On the frontier, nighttime clothing serves a very practical purpose. The adults sit near the fading warmth of the hearth, loosening boots and brushing away bits of dirt gathered during the day. Heavy coats come off first, followed by rough work shirts that smell faintly of wood smoke and cold air. Beneath them remain softer garments meant for sleeping. You quickly realize that warmth during the night depends not only on blankets but also on what people wear beneath them. A common historical detail from frontier life is that many settlers slept in long linen or cotton nightshirts. These garments were simple and loose-fitting, often extending to the knees or even lower. They allowed freedom of movement during sleep, while still providing a light barrier against the cold. The man of the house pulls one such shirt over his head now. The fabric looks worn but clean, its pale surface catching the glow from the embers. The shirt drapes loosely around his shoulders before he climbs beneath the quilt on the rope bed. The woman beside him wears something similar also, though hers appears slightly thicker. She adds a woolen shawl around her shoulders before settling beneath the covers. Even inside the cabin, the night air can grow surprisingly cold once the fire fades. You glance toward the children on the pallets. They remain bundled in layers as well. Small wool stockings still cover their feet, and one child keeps a knitted cap pulled down over their ears. These extra layers may seem excessive, but they serve an important purpose. Clothing traps small pockets of air close to the body. Those pockets gradually warm with body heat, creating a kind of personal insulation that helps maintain warmth through the night. When the fire dwindles to glowing coals, these layers often make the difference between comfortable sleep and shivering until morning. One interesting detail recorded in several early American household guides advised settlers to avoid wearing damp clothing to bed at all costs. Even slightly wet fabric could pull warmth away from the body, making the night far colder than expected. You imagine how easy it might be for clothing to become damp during a long winter day filled with snow sweat or melting frost. No one here takes that risk lightly. A curious custom mentioned in a few pioneer letters describes families placing warmed garments near the fire before bedtime. Shirts and stockings were sometimes draped across wooden pegs beside the hearth so the fabric could absorb a little heat before being worn for sleep. The idea must have felt wonderful on especially cold evenings. One of the children yawns and pulls their blanket higher. Their wool caps slip slightly over one eye, but they seem too tired to adjust it. The room grows dimmer as the embers settle deeper into the hearth. Their glow still provides light, but it is softer now, spreading across the floor like a fading sunset. You tug your own blanket closer and notice the rough weave of the wool against your chin. The fabric feels thick and durable, clearly designed to last through many winters. Across the room, the father stretches one arm out from beneath the quilt and reaches toward the fire with the iron poker. He shifts a small piece of wood closer to the embers, encouraging one last flicker of flame. The glow brightens briefly, revealing the quiet arrangement of sleepers around the hearth. There has been considerable discussion among historians about how settlers balance comfort and practicality in their sleeping clothing. Some believe most people wore very simple garments to bed, while others suggest that multiple layers remained common during colder months. Surviving clothing from frontier settlements indicates that warmth often took priority over elegance. As you watch the family settle deeper beneath their quilts, that conclusion seems obvious enough. Fashion is not the concern here. Warmth is. Outside, the wind stirs again, brushing against the cabin walls and slipping through the trees with a hollow whisper. The sound feels distant yet persistent, like the quiet breathing of the wilderness surrounding this small shelter. Inside the cabin, however, the layers of clothing, blankets, and shared warmth begin doing their quiet work. The adults shift slightly beneath their quilt, finding comfortable positions within the narrow space of the rope bed. The ropes beneath the mattress creak faintly before growing still. One child curls closer to another beneath their shared blanket, their breathing already slow and even. You lie back and feel the warmth slowly gather beneath the layers around you. At first the air feels cool against your face, but gradually the blankets trap enough heat to create a small cocoon of comfort. The sensation spreads slowly. Feet grow warmer first, then hands, then the steady warmth across your chest. The embers continue glowing softly, their faint crackling almost rhythmic now. Somewhere in the darkness, outside a branch, snaps, perhaps under the weight of snow, or the cautious step of a passing animal. The sound fades quickly into the vast quiet of the forest. Inside the cabin, however, the warmth holds layers of wool, simple nightshirts, knitted caps and stockings. Each piece contributes to the small system of survival that allows this family to rest through the long winter night. Your eyes grow heavier as the room settles deeper into stillness. Yet one more layer of comfort remains. Because above every sleeper lies the most important protection against the cold. The thick handmade quilts that carry warmth, memory, and patience stitched carefully into every square. The cabin has grown dimmer now, the fire settled into a bed of glowing embers that breathe quietly beneath the last pieces of wood. Above the sleepers, however, something else holds the warmth far more reliably than fading flames. The quilts. You feel one being pulled gently over you, heavy and thick, its weight pressing down with a reassuring firmness. The fabric carries the faint scent of wool wood smoke and the countless nights it has already survived. It is not perfectly smooth. Your fingers trace the uneven lines of stitching that run across its surface like tiny roads connecting small islands of cloth. Each square is different. One patch is deep blue, worn almost soft as velvet from years of use. Another square shows a faded floral print that must have once belonged to a dress long since outgrown or torn. A third piece carries the dull brown shade of an old work shirt. These fragments have been carefully stitched together until they form something stronger than the individual pieces. A quilt! Hand-sewn quilts played a vital role in the daily life of many frontier families. Surviving household records from the 19th century often mention quilting as a regular winter activity. When outdoor work slowed and evenings grew longer, women gathered scraps of fabric and stitched them together into blankets capable of trapping remarkable warmth. You run your hand across the quilt again and notice the careful pattern of stitches holding these layers together. Beneath the top fabric lies another layer of cloth, and between them sits a soft filling known as batting. Early batting might be made from wool cotton, or even bits of old cloth torn into smaller pieces. The result is a thick blanket designed to hold heat close to the body. Nearby, the children have disappeared almost entirely beneath their own quilt. Only a tuft of hair and the edge of a wool stocking peek out from the layered folds. The blanket rises and falls gently with their breathing. You begin to understand why quilts mattered so much on the frontier. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in pioneer letters reveals that certain quilts were considered prized possessions passed down through generations. Families occasionally recorded the names of those who made them or the dates they were finished. A quilt could quietly carry decades of family history stitched into its seams. Perhaps the blanket covering you tonight holds... It surely held such a... The fire glows softly in the hearth now, its light dim but steady. In that glow you can see another quilt spread across the rope bed near the centre of the room. It appears even thicker than the one covering you, layered with extra fabric and stitched into a pattern of diamonds. You notice how the adults beneath it pull the edges tightly around their shoulders, sealing in the warmth created by their bodies. Warmth is precious here, and quilts serve as guardians of that warmth. A topic that continues to invite discussion among historians concerns just how essential these quilts were during frontier winters. Some researchers believe the combination of layered quilts and shared body heat allowed families to sleep comfortably, even when temperatures dropped dramatically outside. Others suggest that many nights remained quite chilly despite these efforts, especially in cabins with poor insulation. Looking around this room, you suspect the truth lies somewhere between those viewpoints. The quilts clearly help, but the cold still lingers at the edges of the room, waiting patiently beyond the reach of the blankets. You pull the quilt closer beneath your chin and feel its comforting weight settle more firmly around you. The batting inside shifts slightly, releasing a faint rustle like distant leaves moving in the wind. Across the cabin, one of the children stirs briefly, and then settles again, burrowing deeper beneath their covers. Another interesting frontier habit involved layering multiple quilts on especially cold nights. Some families piled 2 or even 3 blankets together to create an insulated pocket of warmth. The top quilt might be thick and decorative, while the lower ones were simpler pieces made from rough wool or cotton. Tonight you feel only one blanket above you, but it is substantial enough to do its job. The room continues to darken as the embers sink deeper into the ash bed of the hearth. Their glow still paints the logs with a soft reddish hue, but the shadows between them grow longer. Outside, the wind brushes gently against the roof. Inside, the quilts perform their quiet work. The warmth beneath your blanket grows gradually stronger. At first, the air trapped inside feels cool, but as your body releases heat, the space becomes more comfortable. The heavy fabric prevents that warmth from escaping easily. It's a simple but effective system. You shift slightly and hear the mattress beneath you rustle again. The straw inside adjusts to your movement, settling into a new shape that supports your weight. Nearby, the rope bed creaks softly as someone turns beneath their quilt. For a moment, the cabin seems to breathe as one living thing. Fire! Wood! Fabric! Human warmth, all of it working together against the cold pressing from outside. You think again about the careful stitching of the quilt and the patience required to create something like this. Each square of cloth had to be cut by hand, each stitch placed carefully through thick layers of fabric. It must have taken many evenings beside a fire like this one to finish. And now the blanket rests here doing exactly what it was meant to do, keeping the cold at bay. Your eyes grow heavier as the quiet deepens around you. The rustling of blankets fades, replaced by the steady rhythm of breathing sleepers and the faint ticking sound of cooling wood near the hearth. The quilts have done their part, yet before anyone truly drifts into deep sleep, one more careful task still waits beside the fire. Because the embers must be arranged just right if their warmth is to survive until morning. The quilts have settled around the sleepers like quiet shields against the cold, and the cabin grows calmer with every passing minute. Yet the night is still young, and the fire must be prepared carefully if its warmth is to last until dawn. You notice the father rising slowly from the rope bed, careful not to disturb those already drifting towards sleep. He steps softly across the wooden floor toward the hearth. The embers glow deep red beneath a thin layer of grey ash. Small tongues of flame still appear now and then, but they flicker weakly like the last breaths of daylight fading beyond the hills. This is the moment when the fire must be managed wisely. You watch him kneel beside the hearth with the iron poker in hand. The metal tool slides gently into the bed of coals, shifting them slightly. Sparks lift and drift upward through the chimney, vanishing into the night. He moves slowly, almost thoughtfully, as if the fire were a living creature that must be coaxed rather than forced. Preparing the hearth before sleep was an important nightly ritual for frontier families. Many early household guides describe the technique known as banking the fire, a method that allowed the coals to remain alive beneath ash for many hours. Instead of letting the flames burn brightly and vanish quickly, settlers arranged the logs and embers in ways that slowed the burn. The father now pulls one partially burned log closer to the centre of the hearth. He places another thick piece of hardwood beside it, not directly in the flames, but near enough that the heat will eventually catch. Then he scoops a small mound of ash over the brightest coals, dimming their glow but protecting their heat. This process may look simple, yet it requires a certain instinct developed through experience. Too much ash and the fire suffocates. Too little and the wood burns too quickly. The result, when done well, is a quiet bed of embers that can survive the long hours of darkness and still provide warmth when morning arrives. You feel the air shift slightly as he finishes the arrangement. The flames shrink, but the deeper glow beneath them grows steadier like a slow heartbeat hidden beneath layers of ash. Nearby, the sleepers barely stir. The children remain wrapped in their quilts, the rise and fall of their breathing steady and slow. The adults beneath the rope bed quilt adjust slightly but do not fully wake. The fire has become quieter now, but it still radiates gentle warmth. A small detail occasionally mentioned in frontier diaries tells of families placing large pieces of wood known as backlog logs at the rear of the hearth. These heavy logs burned extremely slowly and could continue glowing for many hours. Some settlers preferred oak or hickory for this purpose because those woods produced long-lasting heat with fewer sparks. You glance at the hearth again and notice the thick log positioned toward the back. It glows faintly along one edge where the coals touch it. That log will likely still be smouldering when morning light arrives. Across the room, the wind presses briefly against the cabin walls, sending a low creak through the logs. The sound drifts through the quiet space and fades again into the forest. Inside the hearth, the father gives one final adjustment with the poker. Satisfied, he sets the tool aside and rises carefully. There has been considerable discussion among historians about how important fire maintenance was for everyday survival on the frontier. Some researchers believe the ability to keep a fire alive overnight was one of the most valuable household skills settlers possessed. Others point out that many families also kept flint and steel nearby, in case the fire did go out. Even so, relighting a cold hearth on a freezing morning could be a miserable task. Watching the quiet precision of this ritual, you begin to understand why settlers took such care. The father steps back toward the rope bed and slips beneath the quilt once more. The ropes creak softly as his weight settles across the mattress. The blanket lifts slightly, then falls back into place around his shoulders. The room returns to stillness. The fire now glows like a quiet lantern beneath its blanket of ash. It no longer crackles loudly. Instead, it produces a faint ticking sound as the wood shifts and the heat moves through the logs. You lie back beneath your quilt and feel the warmth continuing to drift gently across the room. It is softer now than before, more patient, more steady. The kind of warmth designed to last rather than impress. Outside, the night stretches endlessly across the frontier landscape. Snow rests quietly on tree branches and the frozen ground reflects the pale light of distant stars. Inside the cabin, the carefully banked fire continues its silent work. The quilts hold warmth close to sleeping bodies. The rope bed supports its occupants with a faint tension in its cords. The straw mattresses rustle softly whenever someone shifts in their sleep. All of these small details combine into a delicate system that allows the family to endure the winter darkness. Your eyes grow heavier as the glow from the hearth dims slightly, though the warmth remains. The wind moves again through the forest, carrying with it the distant sounds of the wilderness. Because even as the fire rests quietly beneath its blanket of ash, the world outside the cabin never truly sleeps. and tonight those distant sounds will become part of the long frontier night. The fire now rests quietly beneath its layer of ash, glowing like a hidden jewel in the hearth. The cabin has fallen into a deeper stillness, broken only by the slow breathing of the sleepers and the faint ticking sounds of wood adjusting to the heat. Yet beyond the cabin walls, the night continues its own restless life. You notice it first as a distant rustling sound. The wind brushes through the branches outside, setting the forest in motion. Bare limbs scrape softly against one another, producing a dry whisper that drifts through the darkness. Occasionally a heavier gust passes over the roof, sending a faint tremor through the wooden shingles. The cabin answers with a quiet creak. It's not an alarming sound. In fact, structures built from heavy logs often shift slightly as temperatures change and the wood contracts in the cold. The entire building seems to sigh gently in response to the winter air pressing against it. You lie still beneath the quilt and listen. Beyond the wind, other sounds gradually reveal themselves. Somewhere far off, a low howl rises briefly through the forest before fading again. The sound carries across the frozen land in a long echo that feels both haunting and strangely beautiful. Wolves once roamed widely across the North American frontier, and their calls often filled the night air around early settlements. Historical accounts from frontier communities frequently mention hearing wolves howling from the surrounding hills or woodlands. For settlers living in remote cabins, these distant voices became a familiar part of the nighttime soundscape. You imagine the animals moving silently through the snow, their breath rising in pale clouds beneath the starlit sky. Inside the cabin, however, the family remains undisturbed. The quilts trap warmth around them, and the steady glow from the hearth continues to push back the cold that presses against the walls. The sounds of the forest might seem unsettling at first, but those who live here grow accustomed to them over time. Another sound reaches your ears. A faint tapping noise touches the roof for a moment before stopping. Perhaps a branch brushing the shingles in the wind. Perhaps snow sliding slowly down the slope of the roof and dropping softly to the ground below. The frontier night carries many small mysteries. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the mattress rustle beneath you. The straw adjusts again, settling into a shape that supports your shoulders more comfortably. Across the room, one of the children murmurs briefly in their sleep. The sound fades quickly, replaced once more by steady breathing. A curious detail mentioned in a few pioneer journals describes how some settlers believed certain nighttime sounds carried meaning. The hoot of an owl, the cry of a fox, or the distant bark of a dog might be interpreted as signs of approaching weather changes. Whether these beliefs held scientific truth or simply reflected the deep attentiveness people developed toward their surroundings is difficult to determine. Still, when you live this close to nature, every sound begins to feel important. The wind strengthens for a moment and slides along the cabin walls with a low humming tone. You notice how the chinking between the logs helps soften the sound, preventing the wind from whistling sharply through the gaps. Without that protective layer of clay and straw, the room would likely feel far colder and far noisier. Researchers who study frontier housing often discuss how settlers adapted their homes to manage both temperature and sound. Thick logs provided insulation not only against cold but also against the constant noises of the wilderness. Even so, cabins were never completely silent, and perhaps that is part of what made them feel alive. The forest outside shifts again, sending another quiet chorus of branches moving together in the wind. Snowflakes drift gently across the clearing, catching the pale glow of the moon before settling on the frozen ground. Inside, the glow from the hearth pulses softly beneath its blanket of ash. Your eyes grow heavier as the rhythm of the night settles into something almost soothing. The distant calls of animals blend with the gentle creaks of the cabin, until they form a kind of lullaby shaped by the wilderness itself. The rope bed creaks once more as one of the adults turns beneath the quilt. The sound fades quickly, replaced by the steady hush of sleep. For people living on the frontier, learning to rest through these sounds became an important skill. The wilderness rarely offered perfect silence, and waiting for it would mean staying awake most of the night. Instead, settlers allowed the sounds to become part of the background of life. The wind, the animals, the shifting wood of the cabin itself. Gradually your breathing slows, matching the calm rhythm of the room. Outside, another distant howl echoes across the forest before fading into the vastness of the winter night. Inside, the fire continues its quiet work beneath the ashes, and the warmth within the quilts remains steady. The cabin rests in its small circle of light and shelter, surrounded by miles of dark wilderness that moves and whispers beyond the walls. And somewhere in that darkness, the winter landscape continues, preparing its own silent surprises. Because before morning arrives, another unlikely ally will gather quietly around the cabin: the snow itself. The sounds of the forest fade slowly into the background as the night deepens, leaving the cabin wrapped in a quiet cocoon of warmth and breathing sleepers. Outside, the temperature continues its steady drop, and with it comes another quiet transformation across the frontier landscape. Snow begins to fall. At first, it drifts down lightly, each flake settling almost silently across the clearing around the cabin. The wind carries them gently through the branches of the nearby trees, where they cling to bark and twigs like tiny crystals. Soon the ground is dusted with a fresh layer of white. From inside the cabin, you cannot see the snowfall directly, but you sense the change. The wind softens. The forest grows quieter. Even the faint sounds of distant animals seem muffled as the snow spreads across the land like a thick blanket. Snow, despite its reputation for bringing cold, can actually become an unexpected helper for those sleeping inside frontier cabins. As it piles against the outer walls of a log house, it forms a natural barrier that slows the movement of cold air. In a curious twist of nature, the same snow that chills the landscape can also act as insulation when it gathers around a structure. Many early settlers noticed this effect during long winters. A layer of snow packed against the base of the cabin often reduced the draft that slipped through cracks near the floor. You imagine the snow slowly building along the lower edges of the logs, sealing tiny openings where the wind once crept inside. The result is subtle but real. Inside the cabin, the air begins to feel slightly steadier. The faint chill that once lingered along the floor seems less noticeable now. The warmth from the hearth remains modest, but it no longer escapes quite as quickly through the lower seams of the walls. One early American farming journal even noted that some settlers deliberately shoveled snow against their cabin walls during particularly bitter winters. By creating a packed layer around the structure, they formed a temporary barrier that helped block drafts and preserve indoor warmth. It may not sound like an elegant solution, but on the frontier, practicality always outweighed appearance. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the warmth gathered beneath the layers of fabric. The straw mattress rustles again, adjusting quietly as you move. Across the room, the sleepers remain undisturbed. The children on their pallets lie close together beneath their blanket, their breathing slow and even. The rope bed creaks softly as someone turns, but the movement quickly settles again. The fire continues glowing beneath its protective layer of ash. From time to time, a faint crack echoes within the hearth as a coal shifts, or a hidden pocket of heat releases itself through the wood. The sound is small but comforting, a reminder that the fire still lives. There is an interesting observation made by several historians who study frontier architecture. They point out that log cabins often perform better in winter than many people expect, especially when the logs were thick and the chinking well maintained. Wood itself holds air within its fibers, which slows the transfer of heat. However, these same researchers also acknowledged that cabins were rarely airtight. Tiny drafts almost always found their way through seams or around doors and windows. Tonight, the snow helps soften those weaknesses. Outside, the snowfall grows heavier. Flakes swirl through the clearing, piling slowly along the roof edges and drifting against the sides of the cabin. The world becomes quieter with every passing minute. Inside, the hush deepens. You pull the quilt slightly higher and feel the warm pocket of air beneath it grow more comfortable. The wool fibers trap the heat released by your body, creating a small sanctuary within the blanket. The difference between the warmth beneath the quilt and the cooler air around your face is gentle but noticeable. Another curious detail recorded in a handful of pioneer letters describes how children sometimes peeked outside during snowstorms simply to admire the stillness that fresh snowfall created. The world could appear almost magical beneath moonlight, the landscape transformed into a silent field of shimmering white. Tonight, however, everyone sleeps. The long day of work and the steady rhythm of the cabin have pulled the family into deeper rest. Outside, the forest stands quietly beneath its growing coat of snow. Branches bend slightly under the accumulating weight, releasing occasional soft thumps as clumps of powder fall to the ground. Inside the cabin, the warmth remains modest but dependable. The snow pressing gently against the walls forms an accidental shield, helping the small fire hold its territory against the winter cold. You listen to the quiet breathing around you and notice how the sounds of the night have softened even further. No sharp wind whistles through the logs. No loud creaks disturb the room. Only the faint rustle of blankets and the steady pulse of the embers in the hearth. Gradually, the entire cabin seems to settle into a deeper sleep. The snow continues to fall outside, building its silent insulation around the structure. And within the quilts, the warmth holds steady as the long frontier night moves slowly toward its middle hours. But warmth, on nights like this, does not come only from blankets and fire. Earlier in the evening, another small detail quietly prepared the body to face the cold hours ahead. The simple foods eaten before bed. The cabin remains still beneath its quilts and quiet breathing, but warmth during a frontier night does not come only from firewalls or blankets. Earlier in the evening, before anyone settled into their beds, another quiet defense against the cold had already been prepared. Supper. You remember the smell lingering in the room when you first stepped inside? The faint scent of stew, the earthy aroma of bread. Those simple foods were not chosen only to fill hungry stomachs after a long day. They also played a small but meaningful role in helping bodies endure the long cold hours of night. Meals on the American frontier were often modest but hearty. Diaries from settlers frequently mention foods such as cornmeal porridge, potatoes, beans, salt pork, and thick stews cooked slowly over the hearth. These meals provided calories that helped the body produce heat as it digested the food. You can almost imagine the warmth spreading through the body after eating a bowl of something hot beside the fire. In fact, several early household guides recommended serving warm evening meals during winter because digestion itself generates heat. A bowl of stew or porridge before bed might help a person stay warmer through the first part of the night when the fire was still fading. That small bit of warmth mattered more than you might expect. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the quiet comfort of a full stomach even now, hours after the meal has passed. Hunger on a winter night would have made sleep far more difficult. Across the room, one of the children turns beneath the blanket, perhaps still wrapped in dreams that drift somewhere between the warmth of supper and the glow of the hearth. A curious practice mentioned in several pioneer journals involves drinking warm milk before bed during cold weather. Families who kept cows sometimes heated milk in a kettle and shared it among the household as a nighttime drink. The warmth of the milk, combined with its richness, was believed to help both comfort the body and encourage sleep. It's not a luxurious beverage by modern standards, but in a quiet cabin surrounded by winter wilderness, it probably felt like a small treasure. The embers in the hearth pulsed softly, their glow reflecting off the iron kettle still hanging nearby. Earlier in the evening, that kettle may have held the stew that fed the family. Now it hangs empty above the fading heat. You imagine the gentle bubbling sound it might have made hours ago, as vegetables and bits of meat simmered slowly. Researchers who study frontier living conditions sometimes explore how diet affected settlers' ability to endure harsh winters. Some believe that high-calorie meals rich in fats and starches helped bodies maintain warmth during cold nights. Others note that food supplies could become limited during difficult seasons, which meant families sometimes went to bed with far less nourishment than they would have liked. Looking at the quiet sleepers around you, it is easy to hope that tonight's meal was filling enough. The warmth beneath the quilts continues to build gradually as body heat collects within the layers of fabric. Outside, the snowfall deepens, pressing softly against the cabin walls and covering the clearing in silence. Inside the room, the smells of supper still linger faintly in the air. A trace of cooked onion, a hint of broth, the smoky sweetness of bread warmed beside the hearth. These scents blend with the familiar smell of wood smoke and wool blankets, creating an atmosphere that feels both humble and deeply comforting. You pull the quilt closer around your shoulders and feel the gentle pressure of the heavy fabric settling more firmly around your body. Across the cabin, the rope bed creaks once as one of the adults shifts beneath the quilt. The sound fades, quickly replaced again by steady breathing. Another small detail from frontier life reveals that some settlers believed eating certain foods before sleep helped them rest more peacefully. Honey stirred into warm drinks or sweet corn cakes eaten after supper were sometimes thought to calm the mind. Whether those beliefs carried any scientific truth remains uncertain, but the idea of ending the day with a small comforting treat clearly held appeal. Even simple comforts mattered in a world where daily life required so much physical effort. Outside, the snowfall continues, the forest grows quieter beneath its white covering, and the wind that once brushed against the cabin now drifts more gently through the branches. Inside, the warmth created by supper fire quilts and shared body heat slowly blends together. You notice how the air beneath your blanket feels noticeably warmer now than when you first lay down. The heat trapped within the quilt has grown steady and reassuring. Your breathing slows, your muscles relax. The long day of movement and cold air begins to fade from your body. Sleep edges closer. The embers glow softly like watchful eyes in the hearth. The snow presses quietly against the walls, and the quiet comfort of a warm meal still lingers somewhere deep inside, helping your body carry its warmth through the long frontier night. But there is another reason the cabin grows so quiet at this hour. Another rhythm that shapes the nights of frontier families. The darkness itself. Because with only candles or firelight to guide them, settlers often found themselves going to bed far earlier than most people today. The quiet warmth from supper lingers in your body as the cabin continues drifting deeper into the night. Outside, the Soval moves gently across the clearing, softening the wilderness into a silent white landscape. Inside the cabin, however, darkness has already taken control of most of the room. Only the hearth still glows. The embers shine dimly beneath their blanket of ash, casting a faint red light that barely reaches the far corners of the cabin. Shadows stretch along the log walls and gather beneath the ceiling beams. This deep darkness is not unusual for frontier households. Artificial lighting was limited and often expensive. Candles required wax or tallow, both of which took time and resources to produce. Oil lamps existed as well, but they depended on supplies that were not always easy to obtain in remote settlements. Because of this, families frequently structured their evenings around the natural rhythm of daylight. When the sunset, activities gradually slowed. When the fire dimmed, sleep usually followed. You lie beneath the quilt and notice how the room has shifted into that quieter nighttime mode. Earlier in the evening, there was the murmur of conversation, the clatter of bowls during supper, and the steady sounds of chores being finished before bed. Now those noises have vanished completely. Even the children have stopped stirring. The darkness encourages rest in a way that electric lighting rarely allows in modern homes. With little illumination available, there are few reasons to remain awake once the day's work has ended. You feel your eyes adjusting slowly to the dim glow from the hearth. Shapes appear and fade within the shadows. The outline of the rope bed, the wooden table near the wall, the iron kettle hanging above the fire. Everything feels quieter in this half-light. A historical observation often mentioned by researchers studying early American life is that many families went to bed far earlier than people do today. Without bright lamps or glowing screens to extend the evening sleep followed the natural setting of the sun. Some households might retire only an hour or two after nightfall. Of course, the long winter nights meant that people sometimes slept in two segments rather than one long stretch. Old letters occasionally mention a period of quiet wakefulness during the middle of the night, when people might add wood to the fire, whisper prayers, or simply sit quietly before returning to sleep. Whether that pattern occurred in every cabin remains uncertain, but the long darkness certainly encouraged unusual rhythms of rest. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the warmth continuing to build beneath the thick fabric. The cold air above the blanket brushes your face gently, reminding you how thin the line is between comfort and winter chill. Across the room, the rope bed creaks softly once more as someone adjusts beneath the covers. The sound echoes faintly through the dim cabin before fading again into silence. A small detail mentioned in a few frontier diaries describes how families sometimes saved their best candles for special evenings. Celebrations, visiting guests, or important household tasks might justify the extra light. On ordinary nights, however, the fire alone provided all the illumination anyone needed. Candles were simply too valuable to burn casually. You imagine how different the world must have felt when darkness arrived so completely each night. Without the glow of streetlights or electric lamps, the frontier sky would have appeared vast and brilliantly filled with stars. Even inside the cabin, the absence of bright light shapes the atmosphere. The quiet seems deeper. The warmth feels more concentrated. Every small sound becomes easier to notice. The embers in the hearth shift again with a soft crack, sending a brief sparkle of orange light across the floorboards. For a moment, the cabin brightens slightly, revealing the sleeping forms beneath their quilts. Then the glow fades once more. Researchers who examine frontier living conditions sometimes discuss how these early sleep schedules may have helped settlers cope with the demands of daily labor. Long days of physical work naturally led to earlier bedtimes. Combined with the limited light available at night, the result was a lifestyle closely tied to the cycles of sunrise and sunset. Looking around this quiet cabin, that connection feels unmistakable. The entire household now rests beneath the steady rhythm of night. You pull the quilt higher beneath your chin and listen to the calm breathing around you. Outside, the snowfall continues quietly, wrapping the landscape in deeper stillness. Inside the cabin, the dim glow of the hearth remains the final source of light. Gradually, your eyes grow heavier again. The darkness encourages sleep in a gentle but persistent way. The world beyond the cabin fades into distant silence, and within the quilts, warmth holds steady as the long winter night carries everyone further toward rest. But even in this quiet moment, the frontier demands a certain kind of readiness. Because sleep here is never completely careless. Near the bed, certain tools remain within reach, just in case the night decides to bring something unexpected. The darkness inside the cabin deepens until the hearth is little more than a quiet glow beneath its ash. Everyone is settled now, the quilts pulled high, the breathing steady and slow. But as your eyes adjust to the dimness, you begin to notice something else about the sleeping arrangements in this room. The beds are not truly separate. Even the rope bed near the hearth holds more than one sleeper beneath its quilt, and the pallets on the floor lie so close together that the blankets nearly overlap. It is a reminder that privacy is a luxury rarely available in frontier homes. Instead, warmth and practicality shape the night. You feel the presence of the sleepers around you. Not intrusive, just close. A soft rustle of fabric when someone shifts, the faint warmth drifting through the air from the nearby quilts. In a cabin like this, shared sleeping becomes part of the natural rhythm of life. Across much of early America, particularly in rural or frontier communities, it was common for several people to share the same bed. Beds themselves were valuable household items that required time and resources to build. When families grew larger or guests arrived unexpectedly, sharing space became the simplest solution. In winter, the arrangement offered an additional advantage. Bodies sleeping close together create warmth. You feel that warmth now in subtle ways. The air near the center of the room feels softer than the cooler spaces near the walls. Beneath the quilts, heat gathers and stays trapped between layers of wool and cloth. The children on the floor pallets have already drawn closer together in their sleep. One small arm rests across another blanket, the movement instinctive rather than planned. The rope bed creaks quietly as someone shifts again beneath the heavy quilt. The sound fades quickly, absorbed by the thick logs surrounding the room. There is a curious anecdote recorded in several early travel journals from the American frontier. Visitors sometimes describe the surprising closeness of sleeping arrangements in rural cabins. A traveller might arrive expecting a separate guest bed and instead find themselves sharing a mattress with members of the household, or even complete strangers who had also stopped for shelter. For those accustomed to the customs of the time, this was rarely considered unusual. Survival in a remote environment often outweighed social formalities. You imagine the quiet practicality of such moments. Boots removed near the door. A place cleared on a mattress. Quilts adjusted to make room for another tired traveller escaping the cold. Here in this cabin tonight, the sleepers have arranged themselves in ways that maximize warmth and conserve space. The center of the room holds the cluster of beds. The corners remain empty, colder and darker, where the warmth from the hearth cannot reach as easily. This pattern appears deliberate, shaped by experience gathered through many winter nights. Researchers who examine domestic life on the frontier sometimes discuss how shared sleeping spaces affected family dynamics. Some believe the closeness strengthened bonds and encouraged cooperation among household members. Others suggest it may have occasionally caused discomfort or embarrassment, particularly as children grew older. Whatever the emotional experience might have been, the practical benefits are easy to understand. Cold nights reward closeness. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the mattress rustle beneath you. The straw adjusts again, creating a small hollow that holds your shoulder comfortably. Nearby, the quiet breathing of another sleeper rises and falls with gentle regularity. The cabin feels almost like a small island of warmth floating within the frozen wilderness. Outside, the snow continues falling softly across the clearing. The wind has faded to little more than a faint whisper moving through the branches. Inside, the carefully arranged beds hold their warmth. The quilts trap heat. The straw mattresses soften the wooden floor. The rope bed supports its occupants with quiet tension in its woven cords. Every part of the sleeping arrangement contributes to the delicate balance that allows this family to rest through the cold. Another soft creak comes from the rope bed as someone adjusts beneath the quilt. The sound is brief and harmless, but it reminds you how alive the cabin feels even while everyone sleeps. Wood expands and contracts with temperature. Ropes stretch beneath shifting weight. Embers settle deeper in the hearth. All of it creates a quiet symphony of small sounds that mark the passage of time through the night. You pull the quilt closer around your shoulders and feel the warmth beneath it deepen further. The closeness of the sleepers around you helps maintain that warmth. The heat produced by each body becomes part of a shared pool of comfort held beneath the blankets. It is not luxurious, but it works. And on the frontier, working solutions often matter more than perfect ones. Your breathing slows again as the quiet settles deeper into the room. Outside, the snow continues its patient work, building gentle drift around the cabin walls. Inside, the sleepers remain gathered close together, beneath their quilts, sharing warmth, as the night slowly stretches toward its coldest hours. And as the embers glow faintly in the hearth, the small rituals of frontier living continue even in sleep. Because before morning comes, the warmth of blankets will not be the only protection against the cold. Animal skins and thick furs will soon reveal their role in guarding against winter's bite. The warmth shared beneath the quilts holds steady as the night deepens, but blankets alone are not always enough when winter settles across the frontier. In many cabins like this one, another layer of protection often rests quietly among the bedding. Animal furs. You notice one now near the edge of the rope bed where a thick pelt lies draped across the foot of the mattress. Its surface looks dense and slightly glossy in the faint glow of the hearth, the fur catching the dim light like soft frost. One of the sleepers shifts, pulling the pelt farther up beneath the quilt. Immediately, the shape of the blanket rises slightly, the added layer, creating a thicker barrier against the cold air. Animal skin served an important purpose in many frontier households. Before large-scale textile manufacturing became common in the region, furs from animals such as deer, bear, buffalo, and raccoon often provided some of the warmest bedding available. These pelts trapped air within their thick layers of hair, forming natural insulation that worked remarkably well during freezing weather. You reach out and brush your fingers lightly against the edge of the fur. It feels surprisingly soft. The texture is warmer than cloth, almost silky in some places, where the animal's coat remains thick and dense. Beneath the fur lies the leather hide, flexible but strong, which helps the pelt hold its shape across many years of use. Across the American frontier, hunting was not only a source of food, but also a vital means of obtaining materials for both clothing and bedding. Deer hides, for example, could be tanned into durable leather, while the fur itself served as blankets or air mattress coverings. In cabins where wool blankets were scarce, these furs often became the primary defense against winter cold. You imagine the effort required to prepare them. After a successful hunt, the hide would need to be cleaned, stretched, and carefully tanned to prevent decay. This process could take days of work using tools and natural chemicals such as tree bark or animal brains to soften the leather. Only then would the pelt become ready for use inside the cabin. A curious frontier detail occasionally mentioned in personal letters describes families still layering multiple animal skins together beneath quilts on particularly cold nights. A deer hide might lie directly over the mattress, while a second pelt covered the sleepers beneath their blanket. The combination created a thick cocoon of warmth that helped protect against freezing temperatures. You shift slightly beneath your own quilt and notice how the air trapped beneath the blankets has grown noticeably warmer since you first lay down. The heat produced by your body remains safely contained within the layers. Nearby, the rope bed creaks softly again as someone adjusts the fur beneath their quilt. The sound fades quickly into the quiet. There has been considerable discussion among researchers studying frontier life about how heavily settlers relied on animal skins for warmth. Some historians emphasize that wool blankets were increasingly common by the early 19th century, especially in more developed settlements. Others point out that furs remained essential in remote regions where manufactured textiles were difficult to obtain. In truth, many families likely used both whenever possible. Looking around the dim cabin, it is easy to see why. The fur draped across the rope bed appears thick enough to hold heat for hours. Its natural insulation works alongside the quilt above it, creating a double layer that protects the sleepers from the cooling air. Across the floor pallets, the children rely mostly on wool blankets and their shared body warmth. Even without furs, the closeness of their sleeping arrangement helps maintain comfort. Outside, the snowfall continues steadily. Snow gathers along the edges of the cabin roof and presses gently against the lower logs of the walls. The entire landscape beyond the cabin is slowly disappearing beneath a quiet white covering. Inside, the fire glows faintly beneath its ash. From time to time, a small spark flashes deep within the embers, briefly illuminating the stones of the hearth before fading again. The room remains calm. You adjust the quilt slightly and feel its weight settle more firmly across your chest. Beneath it, the mattress rustles softly, the straw shifting into a new shape that cradles your shoulders. Across the cabin, a child sighs in their sleep. The sound is soft and fleeting. Then silence returns once more. Animal furs, quilts, straw mattresses, rope beds, warm clothing and shared body heat. Each element plays a small role in the quiet system that keeps the sleepers comfortable through the long winter night. None of these methods alone could fully defeat the cold, but together they create enough warmth for rest. Your breathing grows slower as the gentle heat beneath the blankets continues building. The cabin feels secure, the heavy logs holding back the wilderness outside. Beyond the walls, the snow drifts quietly through the forest, covering tracks and branches alike. Inside, the layered bedding protects the sleepers from the worst of the cold. Yet before anyone can fully surrender to sleep, one more small ritual of frontier life has already taken place earlier in the evening. The final chores completed before bed. Because even on a winter night like this, the responsibilities of the day never truly end until every task has been settled. The warmth beneath the quilts deepens as the night settles around the cabin, but sleep on the frontier never arrives without preparation. Long before the bedding was arranged, and the fire banked beneath its quiet blanket of ash, the family completed a series of small but important chores that ensure the night passes safely. You remember hearing the sounds earlier in the evening, the creak of the door opening to the cold outside, the dull crunch of boots stepping across snow, the low murmur of voices checking on animals and tools before the cabin closed itself against the darkness. Even now, lying beneath the quilt, you can picture those final tasks unfolding in the fading light of dusk. One common reality of frontier living was that livestock often depended entirely on the family for protection during winter nights. Horses, cows, and chickens needed shelter from the cold and access to feed that had been stored carefully through the autumn months. Before anyone considered rest, those animals had to be secured. You imagine the father stepping into the barn just beyond the cabin earlier in the evening. His breath would have hung in the air like pale smoke as he checked the stalls. Hay might be scattered across the floor so the animals could settle comfortably until morning. These simple chores carried real importance. A neglected animal could become sick during a bitter winter night. A door left unlatched might allow wind or predators to enter the shelter. Careful habits kept the small frontier farm running through the harsher seasons. Inside the cabin, other responsibilities waited as well. Water for the next morning might be brought inside before the outdoor bucket froze solid. Firewood needed to be stacked near the hearth so that it could be reached quickly if the embers weakened during the night. You glanced toward the wall beside the hearth now and noticed the neat pile of split logs waiting there. Each piece has been prepared earlier in the day with an axe, its surface showing the pale grain of freshly split wood. The supply will likely last until morning without anyone needing to step outside into the cold. Across the room, the iron kettle still hangs above the hearth hook. It has been cleaned after supper and left ready for the next day's cooking. The quiet orderliness of the room reflects the habits that settlers developed through necessity. Another small and interesting custom occasionally mentioned in pioneer recollections involved bringing certain tools inside overnight during winter. Metal objects left outdoors could become dangerously brittle in extreme cold, and wooden handles sometimes cracked if exposed to freezing temperatures for too long. Axes, lanterns, and other important tools often found a place along the cabin wall once evenings arrived. You notice one such axe resting near the door, its blade polished smooth from years of use. Scholars who study domestic routines in frontier communities often point out that these nightly chores created a predictable rhythm within the household. The repetition of simple tasks helped families maintain a sense of order in an environment that could otherwise feel unpredictable and harsh. Animals checked, water secured, wood stacked, doors latched. Each step quietly prepared the cabin for the long hours of darkness. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and hear the straw mattress rustle beneath you. The warmth trapped inside the blankets continues to build as your body relaxes deeper into the bedding. Across the cabin, the sleepers remain undisturbed. The rope bed creaks faintly as someone adjusts beneath the fur and quilt layered together. The children on the pallets lie close beneath their blanket, their breathing slow and steady. Outside, the snowfall continues drifting across the clearing. The snow now presses gently against the lower logs of the cabin walls, forming a soft ridge along the base of the structure. The forest beyond stands quiet beneath its growing white coat. Inside, the glow of the hearth pulses softly beneath its ash covering. A faint red light touches the nearby stones and then fades again. You imagine the family finishing those final chores earlier in the evening before gathering around the fire for supper. Perhaps someone stepped outside one last time to glance at the sky, judging the weather, or checking that no animals lingered near the barn. Such habits often developed into quiet rituals repeated every evening. A topic sometimes discussed among historians concerns how frontier families balanced the demands of daily labor with the need for rest. Life required constant attention to small details, yet people also understood the value of preserving their strength for the next day's work. The nightly chores served as a transition. They closed the door on the day's responsibilities and allowed the household to settle into sleep with a sense that everything necessary had been done. You listen to the calm breathing around you and feel that sense of quiet completion lingering in the room. The animals are sheltered. The wood is ready. The doors are secured. The fire is banked. With those tasks finished, the cabin rests safely within its small circle of warmth. Outside, winter continues its slow work across the frontier. Inside, the sleepers drift deeper beneath their quilts as the night moves steadily toward its coldest hours. And as the temperature drops, another challenge quietly reveals itself inside the cabin walls. The stubborn drafts that slip through every tiny crack in the logs. The cabin rests quietly after the evening chores have been completed and the fire glowing softly beneath its ash and the sleepers settled beneath their quilts. Yet even within these sturdy log walls, winter has a way of reminding everyone that the wilderness still presses close. You feel it first as a faint brush of cool air against your cheek. It slips through the cabin almost invisibly, threading its way between the stacked logs and the edges of the door. The draft is gentle, but it carries the unmistakable chill of the frozen night outside. Frontier cabins were strong structures, yet they were rarely perfect barriers against the cold. The logs themselves formed thick walls, but the seams where one log met another created small gaps that had to be filled carefully with chinking. This mixture of clay, mud, straw, and sometimes animal hair helped block the wind, though tiny drafts almost always found a path through somewhere. You notice how the air near the outer wall feels colder than the center of the room. Even beneath your quilt, the difference is noticeable if you stretch one hand toward the logs. The sleepers in the cabin have arranged themselves carefully to deal with this reality. The rope bed sits several feet from the wall, close enough to benefit from the fire's warmth, but far enough to avoid the cold seams of the logs. The pallets on the floor lie closer to the center of the room as well. Experience has taught this family where the drafts tend to appear. A recognized feature of many early log cabins was the constant need to maintain the chinking between the logs. As the seasons changed, the materials filling those seams could shrink, crack, or loosen. Settlers frequently patched the gaps with fresh clay or moss to keep the wind from creeping inside. You imagine the work required each year as winter approached, walking slowly along the cabin walls, pressing new chinkings into every visible crack. testing each seam with her hand to feel where cold air might slip through. One curious detail from frontier accounts describes families stuffing scraps of cloth into especially stubborn gaps during particularly harsh winters. The cloth might not look elegant or wedged between the logs, but it helped block the icy air until a more permanent repair could be made. Practical solutions often mattered more than appearances. You pull the quilt a little higher around your shoulders and feel the warmth beneath it deepen again. The cold air touching your face reminds you how thin the line is between comfort and the winter outside. Across the room, the rope bed creaks softly as someone shifts in their sleep. The fur covering their legs moves slightly, releasing a faint rustle before settling again. A conversation among historians and sometimes centers on how well frontier cabins truly protected families from extreme cold. Some researchers argue that well-built log walls offered surprisingly effective insulation because the wood trapped air within its fibers. Others point out that poorly maintained seams and simple construction methods could allow significant drafts to enter the home. Both viewpoints likely hold some truth. Standing here in the quiet darkness, you can feel how the cabin works. The thick logs slow the cold, the chinking blocks most of the wind, the fire and blankets provide warmth within. Yet the drafts remind everyone that nature is still very close. Outside, the snowfall continues drifting across the clearing. The snow now rests in thicker layers along the base of the cabin, pressing softly against the logs. This accidental insulation helps seal some of the lower cracks where the drafts once slipped inside. The forest beyond stands silent beneath its growing blanket of white. Inside, the sleepers remain wrapped in warmth. You hear the faint rustle of straw beneath a mattress as one of the children turns slightly in their sleep. The sound is brief and gentle, then stillness returns once more. The embers in the hearth glow faintly, releasing a soft ticking sound as the wood settles deeper into the ash. Their warmth spreads outward slowly, though it grows weaker with each passing hour. The drafts continue their quiet journey through the room. They slip beneath the door. They brush lightly along the walls. They remind the sleepers that winter never rests. Yet the cabin holds firm against them. Logs stack carefully together. Clay pressed between the seams. Snow gathered along the base of the walls. Every layer working together to soften beneath them cold. You lie still beneath the quilt and allow the warmth beneath the blankets to build once again. The gentle chill touching your face fades into the background as your body relaxes deeper into the mattress. Across the cabin, the breathing of the sleepers forms a slow rhythm that blends with the faint sounds of the fire. The long frontier night continues its quiet passage. But even within this shelter, winter finds other ways to reveal its presence. Soon another sign of the cold will appear inside the cabin itself. The mist of breath hanging in the air, and the coughing that sometimes echoes through the night when winter settles too deeply into the lungs. The drafts continue their quiet wandering through the cabin, slipping between logs and brushing softly across the sleepers' faces. Even beneath thick quilts and animal furs, the winter air finds small ways to remind everyone that the cold outside has not truly gone away. You notice it now in the air itself. A faint cloud appears for a moment when someone exhales in their sleep. The breath drifts upward in a pale mist before fading into the dimness of the room. It is subtle, but unmistakable. The cabin is warm compared to the frozen landscape outside, yet it is still cold enough for breath to linger briefly in the air. During harsh winters on the American frontier, this was not uncommon. Many early homes lacked the insulation and constant heating systems that modern houses provide. Even with a steady fire in the hearth, temperatures inside cabins could drop significantly during the deepest hours of the night. Settlers often woke in the morning to find frost clinging lightly to windows or forming delicate patterns along the edges of wooden walls. You imagine waking at dawn to see those tiny crystals sparkling in the first light. Across the room, one of the children shifts beneath the blanket and releases a small cough. The sound is soft but noticeable in the quiet room. Winter air could be harsh on the lungs, especially inside small cabins where smoke from the hearth sometimes lingered. Early fireplaces were not always perfectly designed, and on certain nights that smoke might drift back into the room before rising fully through the chimney. A few frontier diaries describe evenings when the cabin filled with a faint haze of smoke, forcing families to open the door briefly despite the cold outside. You glance toward the hearth now, but tonight the chimney seems to be drawing properly. The air carries the smell of wood smoke, but it is gentle rather than overwhelming. Still, winter illnesses were a common concern in frontier communities. Medical knowledge during the early 19th century was limited, and many families relied on home remedies when coughs or fevers appeared. Warm drinks made from herbs, honey or boiled milk were often prepared in the hope that they would soothe irritated throats. One curious treatment mentioned in several pioneer household guides involved placing heated stones near a sick person's bed to keep the air warmer through the night. Whether this method truly helped or simply provided comfort is difficult to determine, but it reveals how carefully families has tried to manage cold conditions inside their homes. The child coughs once more, then grows quiet again. The breathing across the room returns to its slow rhythm. You pull the quilts slightly closer around your shoulders and feel the warmth beneath it continue to build. The trapped heat beneath the blanket forms a small refuge against the cooler air that drifts across the room. Nearby, the rope bed creaks faintly as someone shifts position. The animal fur covering their legs slides slightly with a soft rustling sound before settling again. A topic that continues to interest researchers studying frontier life concerns how common respiratory illnesses may have been during harsh winters. Some historians believe that smoky interiors and cold drafts contributed to frequent coughing and chest discomfort among settlers. Others point out that many families adapted well to these conditions over time, developing habits that helped reduce smoke buildup and maintain cleaner air inside their homes. The truth likely varied from one cabin to another. Looking around this quiet room, you see signs of both challenge and adaptation. The fire burns low but steady. The chimney draws smoke upward through the roof. The sleepers lie wrapped in layers of quilts and furs that protect their bodies from the cold. Outside, the snowfall continues pressing softly against the cabin walls. The forest beyond stands still beneath the heavy winter sky. Inside, the air remains cool but bearable. You watch another faint breath cloud drift upward from beneath a blanket before dissolving into the dim light. The sight carries a strange beauty. Each breath is a small reminder of life and warmth within the shelter of the cabin. The night continues, passing slowly. Embers pulse quietly in the hearth. The wooden walls creak now and then as the cold outside tightens its grip on the forest. But inside the quilts, the warmth remains steady. Your eyelids grow heavier as the rhythm of breathing, and the soft sounds of the cabin settle deeper into the darkness. Sleep begins to pull gently at your thoughts. Yet the knowledge that helped settlers survive these long winters did not always come only from their own experience. Many pioneers learned valuable lessons from the people who had lived on this land far longer than they had. Knowledge passed down through generations of indigenous communities who understood winter in ways newcomers were still discovering. The quiet breathing in the cabin continues as the embers glow softly in the hearth, but the knowledge that helps this family endure winter nights did not appear overnight. Many settlers arrived on the frontier with determination and hope, yet little understanding of how the land truly behaved through its harshest seasons. Over time they learned, and often those lessons came from people who had lived on this continent for countless generations before them. Across North America, indigenous communities had developed a deep understanding of how to survive winter climates that could be unforgiving to the unprepared. Long before frontier cabins appeared in these forests and plains, native families had already discovered ways to stay warm, travel safely, and rest comfortably during the coldest months. Some settlers listened and adapted. You lie beneath the quilt and imagine the slow exchange of knowledge that might have taken place in settlements scattered across the frontier. A visiting hunter sharing advice about clothing or shelter, a neighbor explaining how certain animal furs offered better protection against freezing winds, a trader describing how to arrange bedding more effectively during cold nights. One widely recognized example involves the use of layered animal skins and fur garments. Indigenous peoples throughout northern regions often wore clothing designed specifically to trap heat while allowing moisture to escape. These garments sometimes inspired settlers to adopt similar materials when their own wool clothing proved insufficient. Inside cabins like this one, animal furs used as bedding may reflect that influence. You glance toward the thick pelt draped across the rope bed again. Its soft surface rises slightly with each breath of the sleeper beneath it, holding warmth inside the blanket. The design is simple but effective. Another technique occasionally adopted by frontier families involved arranging sleeping areas closer to the center of a shelter rather than along the walls. Indigenous winter dwellings often use central fires and carefully positioned bedding to maximize shared warmth. The cluster of sleepers around the hearth in this cabin reflects a similar idea. You realize that the arrangement here is not only practical but also shaped by knowledge that traveled quietly between cultures. A small and fascinating detail preserved in some early accounts describes how certain indigenous groups warmed stones in a fire and wrapped them in hides or cloth to create portable heat sources during cold nights. These heated stones could be placed near sleeping areas to provide gentle warmth for several hours. Earlier, you noticed a warm stone placed beneath one of the blankets in this cabin. Perhaps that idea traveled along the same pathways of shared experience. Historians who study frontier interactions sometimes examine how knowledge passed between settlers and native communities. Some scholars emphasize that cooperation and learning occurred more frequently than many early historical narratives suggested. Others argue that the exchange of practical knowledge was often uneven or overlooked in written records. The full picture remains complex, Yet moments like this quiet cabin suggest how survival often depended on observing and adapting to what others had already discovered. Outside, the snowfall continues drifting across the clearing. The forest stands silent beneath its thickening blanket of white. Snow rests on branches and covers the tracks of animals that moved earlier in the evening. Inside, the warmth beneath the quilts holds steady. You shift slightly and feel the straw mattress rustle beneath you. The air within the blanket remains warm and comfortable, protected by layers of fabric fur and shared body heat. Across the room, one of the children sighs softly and turns onto their side. The movement causes the pallet beneath them to rustle faintly. Then stillness returns once more. The embers in the hearth glow like distant stars beneath the ash. Occasionally a faint spark appears and disappears again. The quiet knowledge woven into the cabin's routines continues its work. Layered bedding, carefully banked fires, shared warmth. Small techniques has passed from one generation to another, and sometimes across cultures as well. These details may seem simple, yet together they create a fragile system that protects the sleepers through the cold hours of night. You pull the quilt slightly higher around your chin and feel the gentle warmth settle more firmly around your shoulders. Outside, the wilderness remains vast and indifferent. Inside the cabin, however, the quiet wisdom gathered from many winters helps hold the cold at bay. Your breathing slows again as the steady rhythm of sleep deepens across the room. The long frontier night continues its slow journey toward morning. Yet even on the coldest evenings, the cabin might not always hold only the family who lived there. Sometimes the winter road brought unexpected visitors seeking shelter from the frozen darkness, and when that happened, the sleeping arrangements inside could grow even more crowded. The quiet warmth inside the cabin feels steady now, the quilts holding heat and the embers glowing patiently beneath their grey cover. But life on the frontier often carried an element of unpredictability, even during the calmest winter nights. Sometimes the door opened long after sunset. You imagine the sound clearly. A firm knock against the wooden door, perhaps followed by a voice calling out through the cold air. On isolated roads and forest trails, travellers occasionally found themselves caught by darkness or unexpected weather. When that happened, a nearby cabin could become a welcome refuge. Hospitality played an important role in many frontier communities. With long distances between settlements and few inns available in remote regions, travellers often relied on the kindness of strangers for a place to rest. Diaries from settlers frequently describe offering shelter to hunters, traders or migrants moving westward across the land. The cabin might already feel full, yet space would somehow be made. You glance around the room and picture how such a moment might unfold. The door opens briefly, letting in a rush of cold air and swirling snow. Boots stomp the frost from their soles before stepping inside. Coats are hung near the hearth to dry while the traveller warms their hands beside the fire. Soon the question of sleep arises. Beds are already occupied, of course. The rope bed holds 2 sleepers beneath its heavy quilt. The pallets on the floor lie close together with children bundled beneath their blankets. Yet frontier hospitality often meant sharing what little space remained. Visitors sometimes slept on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in spare blankets or animal skins. If the night was especially cold, families might even invite the guest to share part of an existing bed. The arrangement might seem unusual today, but for those living on the frontier, it represented a practical solution in a world where survival often depended on cooperation. A small and curious detail preserved in several travellers' journals describes the experience of arriving at a cabin late at night and discovering that the household simply rearranged itself to make room. One traveller recalled sharing a narrow rope bed with 2 strangers, while the family children slept crosswise at the foot of the mattress. The night passed comfortably enough, though, perhaps with a bit less personal space than anyone expected. You shift beneath your quilt and imagine the quiet laughter that might follow such arrangements once morning arrived. Across the room, the sleepers continue resting undisturbed. The rope bed creaks softly as someone adjusts beneath the fur and quilt. The sound fades quickly into the stillness. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how common these spontaneous overnight visits truly were. Some researchers believe that hospitality remained an essential social expectation in frontier regions where travellers had few alternatives. Others suggest that households sometimes struggled to accommodate unexpected guests when food or bedding was limited. Both situations likely occurred, yet the tradition of offering shelter remained strong in many areas. You glance toward the empty space near the hearth where an additional pallet could easily be placed if someone knocked at the door tonight. A folded blanket lies nearby, perhaps ready for just such a possibility. Outside, the snowfall continues drifting across the clearing. The forest beyond this cabin stands silent beneath its thick white covering. Trails that once wound between the trees have likely disappeared beneath the fresh snow. Any traveller moving through the wilderness tonight would welcome the sight of warm light glowing through a cabin window. Inside, the warmth holds steady. The embers pulse softly beneath their ash. The quilts rise and fall with the breathing of the sleepers. The cabin itself seems to breathe quietly, its logs creaking now and then as the temperature shifts outside. You pull the blankets slightly closer and feel the familiar warmth gathering again beneath its heavy folds. The thought of a late arriving traveller fades gently from your mind as the room settles deeper into calm. The night outside grows colder. The snow thickens along the roof and walls, and inside the cabin the quiet warmth of shared shelter continues protecting everyone within. But the frontier rarely remains calm for long. Even a peaceful winter night can suddenly change when the weather decides to show its full strength. Because sometimes the wind returns with a force strong enough to shake the cabin itself. And when that happens, sleep becomes a little more watchful. The cabin rests in quiet warmth, but winter on the frontier has a habit of shifting moods without much warning. Outside, the snowfall that once drifted gently through the trees begins to change. The wind slowly gathers strength again, sweeping across the frozen clearing and pushing loose snow into swirling patterns. You notice the change first in the sound. A deeper gust presses against the cabin walls with a low rushing noise stronger than the soft whispers of wind earlier in the night. The logs answer with a faint groan as the pressure moves across them. Then another gust follows. Snow brushes against the sides of the cabin and rattles lightly along the roof. The wooden shingles tremble for a moment before settling again. Inside the cabin, the sleepers remain mostly still, though one of the children shifts beneath the blanket. Winter storms were a regular part of life for many frontier families. Settlers living in northern regions of North America frequently face blizzards that could arrive quickly and last for many hours or even days. These storms carried heavy snowfall and powerful winds capable of burying trails and isolating cabins from nearby settlements. The thought might feel unsettling at first, yet cabins like this one were often built with storms in mind. You listen as another gust sweeps across the clearing outside. The wind pushes snow against the logs, creating a soft brushing sound along the walls. For a moment, the door rattles gently in its frame, but the latch holds firm. The thick logs stacked around the room form a sturdy barrier against the weather. Their weight and interlocking corners help keep the structure stable even when strong winds pass across the landscape. Across the room, the rope bed creaks faintly as someone adjusts beneath the quilt. The movement is brief and the sleeper settles again almost immediately. The fire in the hearth continues glowing quietly beneath its layer of ash. The embers release a faint red light that flickers across the stones and then fades again. You pull the quilt a little higher around your shoulders and listen to the storm gathering outside. A small detail mentioned in several pioneer journals describes how families sometimes woke during particularly strong winter storms simply to check the stability of their homes. A quick glance at the roof beams, a look toward the door latch, or a brief step outside to gauge the wind might be enough to reassure them that everything remains secure. Tonight, however, the sleepers seem confident in the strength of their cabin. The wind roars briefly through the forest, again bending the branches of nearby trees. Snow falls from the limbs in soft clumps that land quietly on the ground. Then the gust fades. The forest returns to its hushed stillness for a moment. Researchers who study frontier architecture often examine how log cabins handled severe weather conditions. The interlocking corner design used in many cabins created a structure capable of resisting strong winds while distributing pressure evenly across the walls. Though simple in appearance, this construction method proved remarkably durable. Looking around the dim interior of the cabin, you can sense that strength. The logs fit tightly together, their surfaces darkened slightly by years of smoke and weather. The roof beams stretch overhead like sturdy arms, holding the structure in place. Even the door appears solid, its thick wooden planks reinforced with iron hinges. Outside, the wind rises once more and sweeps across the clearing with a deeper howl. Snow swirls against the walls again, creating a faint scraping sound that moves slowly along the cabin's surface. Inside, the quilts hold their warmth. The sleepers remain wrapped in their blankets and furs, protected by layers of fabric and the shelter of the sturdy logs around them. You feel the mattress rustle softly beneath you as you shift slightly, settling deeper into the straw. The warmth beneath the quilt remains steady. The storm outside may grow stronger, but inside the cabin, the careful preparations of the evening continue to hold their ground. The banked fire still glows. The doors are latched. The bedding surrounds each sleeper with a warmth. Gradually, the wind begins to ease again. The strong gusts fade back into the softer currents moving through the forest. Snow continues falling, but now it drifts gently once more instead of swirling wildly through the clearing. The cabin grows quiet again. The rope bed creaks faintly as someone turns down their sleep, and the sound echoes softly through the room before fading. You take a slow breath and feel the warmth inside the blankets settle around you once more. Storms may pass across the frontier without warning, but experience teaches families how to prepare for them. Inside this small shelter, the night continues. The storm outside fades gradually into the distance, and within the quiet warmth of the cabin, another gentle force begins to reveal itself. The comfort that comes from simple routine repeated night after night. The wind that rattled the cabin earlier has drifted away again, leaving the forest wrapped in deep quiet. Snow continues falling outside, but now it settles gently, rather than swirling through the trees. Inside the cabin, the warmth gathered through the evening remains steady, and the room begins to sink into that peaceful middle part of the night when even the smallest sounds grow soft and distant. You lie beneath the quilt and begin to notice something subtle about the calm around you. Nothing here feels accidental. Every part of this night follows a pattern that has been repeated many times before. The fire banked carefully, the animals checked, the bedding arranged around the hearth. Even the way the quilts were pulled tight around shoulders and feet carries the quiet confidence of routine. Frontier families depended heavily on routines like these. In environments where weather, wildlife, and distance from neighbours created constant uncertainty, predictable habits helped bring a sense of order to daily life. Settlers developed nightly rituals that ensured their homes were secure and their bodies ready for rest. Over time, those rituals became almost automatic. You imagine the evening unfolding earlier today. The final load of firewood carried inside before dusk. Water brought from the well before ice could form along the bucket's rim. The barn door checked twice to make sure the animals would stay sheltered through the night. Then supper shared around the table. The same steps repeated night after night until they required little thought. Now lying quietly in the dim cabin, you can almost feel that rhythm lingering in the air. A small and interesting note preserved in several frontier memoirs describes how children often learned these routines by watching their parents long before they were old enough to perform the tasks themselves. A boy might notice how his father arranged the fire before bed. A girl might watch how her mother folded quilts to trap warmth more effectively. Years later, those same children would perform the same rituals in their own homes. The knowledge passed forward quietly one evening at a time. Across the room, the sleepers remain wrapped in their blankets. The rope bed creaks faintly as someone shifts, but the sound quickly disappears. The embers glow softly in the hearth, their light barely strong enough now to illuminate the edges of the nearby stones. Even the cabin itself seems to follow its own nighttime routine. The logs settle gently as the temperature outside shifts. Now and then a quiet pop echoes from the hearth as a coal breaks apart within the ash. None of these sounds feel alarming. They belong to the familiar music of the cabin. Researchers who study everyday life on the frontier often remark on how much emotional comfort these repeated routines provided. While the outside world remained unpredictable, the home became a place where certain actions and patterns could be trusted to remain the same each evening. Fire prepared, doors secured, beds arranged. That sense of reliability helped people sleep more easily despite the harsh conditions beyond their walls. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the warmth beneath it spread gently across your chest. The straw mattress rustles again before settling back into stillness. Across the cabin, one of the children turns beneath the blanket and sighs softly before becoming quiet once more. The room feels peaceful now in a way that goes beyond simple warmth. It carries the calm of familiarity. Outside, the snowfall continues drifting down through the branches of the forest. The snow along the cabin walls has grown deeper, forming a soft barrier that further quiets the wind. Inside, the warmth holds steady. You listen to the breathing of the sleepers around you, and realize how naturally the body begins to trust this environment after enough nights like this one. The routines have already done their work. The fire is safe. The bedding is arranged. The cabin stands firm against the winter outside. With those concerns settled, the mind can finally release the tension of the day. Another small detail from frontier life reveals how important these quiet nighttime habits became. Some settlers even described their routines in letters home, explaining how the repetition of small tasks helped them feel more secure in unfamiliar territory. Each evening followed the same comforting pattern, and that pattern slowly transformed a rough cabin in the wilderness into something that truly felt like home. You pull the quilt slightly higher and feel its weight settle gently around your shoulders. The warmth beneath the blanket continues building as your breathing slows. Across the room, the rope bed remains still beneath its heavy fur and quilt. The embers in the hearth glow faintly. The cabin rests, and within that rest, the quiet routines of frontier life continue to guard the sleepers through the long winter night. But even during the calmest nights, a small habit remained common among many frontier households. Certain tools were always kept close at hand beside the bed, just in case the wilderness outside decided to interrupt the quiet. The cabin rests quietly after the wind has passed and the routines of the evening have settled into calm. The sleepers lie beneath their quilts, the fire glows softly in the hearth, and the snow continues falling outside with patient silence. Yet even in this peaceful moment, there is a quiet awareness that life on the frontier rarely allows anyone to sleep without a small measure of readiness. You notice it near the door first. Leaning against the wall is the axe you saw earlier, its handle worn smooth from years of use. The metal head catches the faint red glow of the embers, reflecting a dull shimmer across the blade. It is not placed there by accident. Tools often remained close at hand during the night. On the frontier, an axe served many purposes. It could split firewood, clear fallen branches from a path, or help repair damage to a cabin after a storm. In rare situations, it could even provide protection against wildlife or other dangers that might approach the homestead. Keeping such tools nearby meant they could be reached quickly if needed. Your eyes move slowly across the room. Beside the hearth rests a lantern, its glass chimney slightly clouded from previous use. Tonight it remains unlit, but its presence offers reassurance. If someone needed light suddenly during the night, a spark from the embers could quickly bring the lantern to life. Nearby, a pair of sturdy boots waits beside the rope bed. The leather looks thick and well-worn, shaped by countless miles of walking through fields, forest paths, and muddy roads. Leaving the boots near the bed ensures they can be pulled on quickly if the need arises. Many frontier families develop the habit of placing essential items within arm's reach before going to sleep. You imagine the reasons behind this practice. A sudden storm might require someone to step outside and secure a loose shutter. Livestock in the barn might make a strange noise that calls for investigation. Occasionally, travellers might knock at the door seeking shelter from the cold. Whatever the reason, being prepared mattered. A small but intriguing note appears in several pioneer letters describing how settlers sometimes kept a bucket of water near the hearth during the night. The bucket served as a precaution in case sparks escaped from the fire and threatened to ignite nearby wood or fabric. Cabins were built largely from timber, and even a small fire accident could become dangerous if not addressed quickly. You glance toward the hearth and notice a metal pail resting near the stones. Its presence feels reassuring. Across the room, the sleepers remain undisturbed. The rope bed creaks faintly as someone shifts beneath the fur and quilt, but the movement quickly fades. The children on the floor pallets lie bundled close together beneath their blanket. The air inside the cabin remains cool but comfortable, warmed by the quiet system of fire bedding and shared body heat. Researchers who examine daily life in frontier settlements often remark on how deeply the idea of preparedness shaped household habits. Living far from towns or neighbours meant that families frequently handled challenges on their own. Keeping tools nearby was not a sign of fear, it was simply part of living responsibly in a demanding environment. You pull the quilt closer around your shoulders and feel the warmth beneath it deepen again. The straw mattress rustles softly as you shift, settling into a more comfortable position. Across the cabin, the lantern remains still beside the hearth. The axe rests quietly against the wall. The boots wait beside the bed. Each object stands ready, though the night itself remains calm. Outside, the snowfall continues drifting across the clearing. Snow gathers along the roof and forms deeper ridges against the cabin walls. The forest beyond sleeps beneath its silent covering. Inside, the embers glow faintly, their warmth spreading gently across the floorboards. The tools remain where they are, close enough to reach, but distant enough not to disturb the peace of the room. Gradually, your attention drifts away from them as your eyes grow heavier. The warmth beneath the blankets holds steady. The breathing of the sleepers blends into a soft rhythm that fills the cabin. The frontier night continues its slow passage toward morning, and within this small shelter of logs and firelight, the quiet readiness of the household stands guard even as everyone sleeps. Yet not every source of warmth remained inside the cabin itself. Sometimes the animals that shared the farmstead played their own small role in helping families endure the cold, especially on nights when winter pressed particularly hard against the walls. The cabin remains warm and quiet, the sleepers resting beneath their quilts while the cold snow continues falling outside. Yet the small world surrounding this cabin extends beyond the walls themselves. Just a short distance away, in the dim outlines of barns and small sheds, the farm's animals settle into their own places for the night. You imagine them now. The slow shifting of hooves in a stall, the soft rustle of hay as a cow settles over down, the faint cluck of chickens perched along a wooden beam. Animals played a central role in frontier life not only for food and labour, but also as part of the rhythm of daily survival. Horses pulled wagons and ploughs, cows provided milk, chickens supplied eggs that helped stretch meals through difficult seasons. Caring for these animals through the winter months required careful planning. Earlier in the evening, before anyone climbed into bed, someone likely visited the barn to make sure each animal had enough hay and shelter. Those final checks ensured that the livestock would remain safe through the coldest hours of the night. Now the animals rest quietly beyond the cabin walls, yet their presence contributes more than just the promise of tomorrow's work. Animals generate heat. Even in a simple wooden barn, the body warmth of several animals gathered together can raise the temperature noticeably. Some frontier farms took advantage of this natural warmth by building barns relatively close to the house, or by attaching small animal shelters to one side of the cabin. The idea was not to bring livestock fully indoors, but to keep their warmth nearby. A small detail mentioned in a few early settlement accounts describes how particularly harsh winters sometimes led families to bring smaller animals into protected spaces close to the house. Chickens might be moved into a shed attached to the cabin, or newborn livestock might be sheltered in areas where the wind could not reach them. While this arrangement may sound unusual today, it helped protect valuable animals during periods of extreme cold. You lie beneath the quilt and imagine the barn nearby, its interior dim but warmer than the snowy fields outside. The animals inside breathe slowly, their warm bodies surrounded by hay and wooden walls that block the wind. The heat they produce rises gently into the air, lingering beneath the roof of the barn. Some observers of frontier agriculture have noted how valuable livestock warmth could be during winter months. Farmers understood that keeping animals grouped together in well-protected spaces helped both conserve energy and reduce the amount of feed required to keep them healthy. The animals themselves benefited from the shared heat just as people did inside the cabin. You hear a faint sound drift through the night. It might be the wind brushing against the barn roof, or perhaps a horse shifting its weight in the stall. The noise is distant and soft, barely noticeable above the steady breathing within the cabin. Inside, the warmth remains steady. The rope bed creaks once as someone adjusts beneath the quilt and fur. The sound fades quickly. The children remain bundled together on their pallets, the edges of their blanket rising and falling with each quiet breath. A curious observation recorded in a handful of frontier memoirs describes how some settlers believed the presence of animals nearby helped make the homestead feel less isolated during long winter nights. The sounds of hooves or lowing cattle drifting through the darkness reminded families that life continued beyond the walls of the house. In an environment where miles of wilderness often separated neighbours, those small sounds carried comfort. Across the room, the embers glow faintly in the hearth. The warmth from the fire combines with the heat trapped beneath quilts, and the gentle insulation provided by the snow piled along the cabin walls. Outside, the barn holds its own small pocket of warmth created by the animals resting within. All of these pieces form a quiet network of life across the homestead. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the warmth gather again around your shoulders. The straw mattress rustles softly beneath you before settling back into stillness. Researchers who explore early farm life sometimes reflect on how interconnected the daily routines of people and animals became on the frontier. The well-being of livestock often meant the difference between survival and hardship for a family. Protecting the animals through winter nights was therefore just as important as protecting the people. Inside the cabin, the sleepers remain undisturbed. Outside, the barn stands quietly in the snow. Both shelters hold life within their walls, each contributing in its own way to the fragile balance of warmth and safety during the long winter night. Your breathing slows further as sleep deepens around you. The fire continues glowing softly beneath its ash. The animals rest quietly nearby, and within the small circle of light and shelter, the frontier night carries everyone closer to morning. Yet before sleep claimed the household each evening, one more quiet tradition often filled the room. Stories told softly beside the fire. The warmth in the cabin remains steady, and the quiet breathing of the sleepers fills the room like a gentle rhythm. Yet before the blankets were pulled up and the fire was banked for the night, another quiet tradition often unfolded beside the hearth. Stories. You can almost picture the scene from earlier in the evening. The fire burning brighter, then its flames rising above the logs and casting lively shadows across the walls. The family gathered near the hearth after supper, the children sitting close while the adults finished their last small tasks of the day. It was during those moments that stories often appeared. Life on the frontier left little time for elaborate entertainment, but storytelling required no special equipment. All it needed was memory, imagination, and a few listeners willing to lean closer to the fire. Across many early American settlements, storytelling remained an important part of family life. Tales of past journeys, unusual encounters with wildlife, or humorous moments from daily work were passed from one generation to another through spoken words rather than written pages. These stories helped preserve family history. They also helped pass the time during long winter evenings, when darkness arrived early and outdoor work slowed. You imagine the father beginning one of those stories tonight while the children listened from their places near the hearth. Perhaps he spoke about the first winter he spent in this region when the snow arrived earlier than expected and the river froze solid before the harvest was fully finished. Or maybe he described a hunting trip deep into the forest where deer tracks led him through miles of quiet snow. The details might shift slightly each time the story was told, but the feeling remained the same. Stories gave shape to the challenges and adventures of frontier life. A curious detail preserved in several pioneer recollections mentions that children often asked for the same story night after night. The familiarity of those tales offered comfort, especially when the wilderness outside the cabin felt large and mysterious. You imagine one of the younger children tonight insisting on hearing the tale about a wandering fox that once stole a farmer's hat from a fence post. The story might not be especially dramatic, but the laughter it produced could brighten the entire room. Another small tradition sometimes involved telling stories about local landmarks. Settlers occasionally shared accounts explaining how a nearby hill received its name or how a certain bend in the river became known for an unusual event. Over time, those stories became part of the local identity of a region. The embers in the hearth glow faintly now, but you can still imagine how the brighter flames earlier in the evening illuminated faces gathered around the fire. The flickering light would have made the room feel alive with motion, hands gesturing to emphasize a moment in the story, children leaning forward in anticipation, someone laughing quietly at a familiar twist in the tale. Researchers who explore frontier culture often emphasize how storytelling helped strengthen family bonds. These shared moments created emotional warmth that balanced the physical hardships of frontier living. The stories also served as subtle lessons. Through tales of past mistakes or clever solutions, older generations passed along practical wisdom that younger listeners would carry into their lives. Across the room now, the children sleep beneath their blanket, perhaps still holding fragments of those stories in their dreams. The rope bed creaks softly as one of the adults shifts beneath the quilt. The fur covering their legs rustles slightly before settling again. You lie beneath your own quilt and feel the warmth surrounding you, imagining the voices that filled the cabin earlier in the evening. Stories of winter storms, stories of long journeys westward, stories of animals glimpsed at the edge of the forest, and perhaps even stories of hope for the future. Outside, the snowfall continues drifting quietly across the clearing. Inside, the warmth of the hearth and the memory of those shared moments linger gently in the air. A small and intriguing note from a frontier diary describes how some families ended their storytelling sessions with a short prayer before bed. The words were simple but meaningful, asking for protection through the night and strength for the work waiting the next day. Whether spoken aloud or whispered quietly, those moments helped mark the transition from the busy hours of evening into the calm of sleep. You pull the quilt slightly closer and feel its familiar weight resting across your chest. The straw mattress rustles softly beneath you. The cabin grows even quieter. The stories have ended. The fire rests beneath its ash. The sleepers drift deeper into rest as the long winter night continues its gentle passage. And somewhere within those quiet dreams, the vast frontier beyond the cabin walls begins to shape the imagination itself. Because even during sleep, the endless wilderness has a way of appearing in the dreams of those who live beside it. The cabin lies in deep stillness now. The stories told earlier beside the fire have faded into memory, and the last movements of the sleepers have settled into a steady rhythm of breathing. Outside, the snow continues falling gently across the frontier landscape, covering fields, trees, and narrow trails beneath a quiet white blanket. Within this calm, dreams begin to drift through the minds of the sleepers. You lie beneath the quilt and feel your thoughts soften, moving somewhere between waking and sleep. In such a quiet place, imagination often reaches outward toward the vast wilderness beyond the cabin walls. For those living on the frontier, the surrounding landscape was never far from the mind. The forests, rivers, and open plains shaped daily life so completely that they often appeared in dreams as naturally as they did during waking hours. You imagine the dreams of the family sleeping around you. Perhaps the father dreams of a clear winter morning when the snow crunches beneath his boots as he walks toward the barn. The air is cold but bright, and the sun reflects sharply off the white fields stretching toward the distant hills. The children might dream of the forest itself, of following animal tracks that wind through the snow, of spotting a deer moving silently between the trees, or perhaps of building snow forts beside the cabin once the morning chores are finished. A commonly accepted observation among historians studying frontier culture is that the natural world deeply influenced the thoughts and stories of the people who lived within it. Unlike city dwellers surrounded by buildings and crowded streets, settlers often experienced landscapes that remained largely unlimited by development. The wilderness became part of their mental world as much as their physical one. You close your eyes and picture the forest outside the cabin. Tall trees stand quietly beneath their coat of snow. Branches stretch toward the sky, their outlines softened by the falling flakes. Somewhere deeper in the woods, animals move slowly through the cold night. Foxes step lightly across the drifts. Owls glide silently between branches. The wilderness continues its quiet life while the cabin rests within its small circle of warmth. One curious detail mentioned in several pioneer recollections describes how children sometimes dreamed vividly about animals they had only glimpsed briefly during the day. A distant wolf howl or a flash of movement in the trees might later appear in their dreams as grand adventures. In the imagination of a child, the frontier wilderness could easily become a place of mystery and excitement. Across the room, one of the children murmurs softly in their sleep before settling again beneath the blanket. The sound is brief and gentle. The rope bed creaks faintly as someone adjusts beneath the quilt and fur. Then the room returns to quiet. The embers in the hearth glow faintly, their warmth still spreading slowly across the cabin floor. Outside, the snowfall has begun to lighten, though the ground already holds a thick layer of fresh snow. A topic occasionally explored by historians concerns how isolation shaped the mental and emotional lives of frontier families. Some researchers believe the vast landscape surrounding early settlements encouraged a strong sense of imagination and storytelling. Others suggest that the quiet isolation of frontier life sometimes made dreams and reflections feel especially vivid. Both possibilities seem easy to understand here. The wilderness beyond the cabin stretches for miles in every direction, and yet within these walls, warmth and safety create a small refuge where the mind can wander freely. You pull the quilt slightly closer and feel its familiar weight pressing gently against your chest. The straw mattress rustles softly beneath you before settling again. The breathing of the sleepers continues in a slow, peaceful rhythm. The frontier night carries on quietly. Outside, the forest remains vast and silent. Inside, dreams drift gently through the minds of the family gathered around the hearth. But while dreams carry the imagination far beyond the cabin walls, the morning waiting on the horizon will soon remind everyone of the physical reality of winter. Because when the first light arrives, it will reveal a surprising sight inside the cabin itself. The delicate patterns of frost that sometimes appear during the coldest nights. The quiet of the night continues to deepen inside the cabin. The sleepers remain wrapped in their quilts while the embers glow softly beneath the ash in the hearth. Outside, the snowfall has slowed to a gentle drift and the eases of a frozen landscape rests beneath the pale light of distant stars. Within the cabin, however, winter leaves a delicate mark. You notice it first along the edges of the small window. Thin crystals have begun forming where the glass meets the wooden frame. They spread slowly across the surface in fragile patterns that look almost like tiny ferns or feathers. Frost. During especially cold nights on the frontier, frost sometimes appeared inside cabins when the warmth from human breath and the hearth met the chilled surfaces of windows or poorly insulated walls. The moisture in the air condensed and froze, creating these intricate icy designs. You imagine the surprise of waking in the early morning and seeing those patterns glittering in the faint light. Across the room, the sleepers remain unaware of the quiet transformation taking place. Beneath their blankets, the warmth still holds even as the air near the walls grows colder. The rope bed creaks softly as one of the adults shifts in their sleep. The fur draped across the quilt moves slightly before settling again. A well-documented aspect of early frontier housing is that many cabins had small windows designed more for practicality than for keeping warmth inside. Glass was expensive and sometimes difficult to obtain in remote regions, and so windows were often modest in size. While this helped reduce heat loss, the cold glass still provided a perfect surface for frost to form when temperatures dropped far enough. You picture the morning sunlight striking the window and illuminating those icy patterns like delicate artwork. Another curious observation recorded in several pioneer journals describes how children sometimes traced shapes in the frost with their fingers once they woke up. Simple drawings or letters might appear briefly before melting away as the fire warmed the room again. For a few moments each morning, the frost became a canvas. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the warm pocket of air beneath it grow stronger. The straw mattress rustles softly as it adjusts to your movement. Across the cabin, the children remain bundled together beneath their blanket. Their breathing is slow and steady. The embers in the hearth continue glowing quietly, their heat slowly pushing back against the creeping cold. A discussion that occasionally appears among historians studying early homes concerns just how cold cabins could become during winter nights. Some researchers suggest that interior temperatures might drop significantly once the fire burned low, especially in small structures with limited insulation. Others believe the combination of thick log walls, shared body heat and layered bedding often kept sleeping areas reasonably comfortable despite the chill near the walls. Looking at the frost forming on the window, it is easy to imagine both conditions existing at the same time. The edges of the room grow cold, but beneath the quilts warmth still lingers. Outside, the forest remains silent. Snow rests heavily on the branches of nearby trees, and the ground glows faintly beneath the starlight. Inside the cabin, the frost spreads slowly along the window pane. Each new crystal grows from the last, forming delicate branches that stretch outward like miniature winter forests. You watch the pattern expand for a moment before your eyes grow heavy again. The quiet rhythm of the room draws you deeper into rest. The rope bed remains still. The pallets on the floor lie undisturbed. The embers continue glowing faintly beneath their blanket of ash. Gradually the frost finishes its work along the edges of the glass. Soon the first light of morning will begin to soften those icy patterns, melting them back into droplets of water that slide quietly down the pane. But for now, the cabin remains suspended in the stillness of the final hours before dawn. The sleepers rest beneath their quilts. The frost glimmers quietly on the window, and outside the vast frontier waits patiently for the return of daylight. When that daylight arrives, it will bring more than just warmth. It will bring the quiet sharing of knowledge that helped frontier communities survive winter together. The small tips and lessons neighbours passed from one household to another. The frost continues to shimmer faintly along the window as the night stretches toward its final hours. Inside the cabin, the sleepers remain tucked beneath quilts and furs, the warmth beneath their blankets steady, despite the cold air gathering near the walls. Outside, the snow rests quietly across the clearing, reflecting faint starlight across the silent frontier. Though the family sleeps now, the knowledge that keeps them comfortable through nights like this rarely comes from one household alone. Much of it grows from shared experience. Frontier communities, even when spread across wide distances, often relied on each other to exchange advice about surviving harsh seasons. When neighbours met during market days, church gatherings, or simple visits between farms, conversations frequently turned toward practical matters. How to keep a fire burning longer overnight, which kind of wood produced the most steady heat, how to arrange bedding so the cold drafts from the floor remained at a distance. Such knowledge travelled quietly from one cabin to the next. Accounts from early frontier settlements often describe these informal exchanges of information as essential to daily life. Families who had endured several winters might share their observations with newcomers who had only recently arrived. A visitor might leave with a new idea about sealing cracks in a wall or storing extra blankets near the hearth. You imagine such a conversation taking place not far from this cabin. Two neighbours standing beside a split-rail fence after a snowfall. One explaining how packing snow against the lower logs of a cabin helped block drafts. The other nodding thoughtfully before deciding to try the same method before the next storm. These simple tips could make a noticeable difference once winter settled in. A curious example from a frontier letter describes how one family learned to place straw beneath their bed pallets, rather than only inside mattress ticks. The extra layer helped reduce the chill rising from the wooden floor during the coldest nights. The idea spread gradually among nearby farms. Before long, several households adopted the same approach. You shift slightly beneath the quilt and feel the warmth around you deepen. As your body relaxes further into the bedding, the straw mattress rustles softly before settling once again. Across the room, the rope bed remains still beneath its thick layers of fur and quilt. The children continue sleeping on their pallets, their blankets rising and falling gently with each breath. Researchers who examine frontier communities often highlight how cooperation and shared knowledge helped settlers adapt to unfamiliar environments. Though many families lived miles apart, the exchange of practical ideas helped create a network of collective experience. Some historians emphasize that this cooperation strengthened bonds between neighbours and helped entire communities endure difficult winters. Others suggest that while advice was often shared, each household still had to adapt those ideas to its own specific conditions. Every cabin faced slightly different challenges, different winds, different wood supplies, different soil and terrain, yet the general wisdom passed from neighbour to neighbour still proved valuable. Outside the cabin tonight, the snow forms a thick cushion across the ground and along the lower edges of the walls. The forest beyond the clearing rests quietly beneath its heavy winter coat. Inside, the embers glow faintly in the hearth. The warmth within the quilts remains steady. You imagine the morning that will eventually follow this night. Smoke rising from nearby cabins as fires are stirred back to life. Neighbours meeting along snowy paths to exchange greetings and perhaps a few new observations about the weather. Perhaps someone will remark on how deeply the snow piled against the walls during the night, noting how much quieter the wind sounded because of it. Those small comments will become part of the shared knowledge that shapes the next winter evening. You pull the quilt slightly closer around your shoulders and feel its familiar weight settle across your chest. The warmth beneath it feels secure and comforting. The quiet breathing of the sleepers fills the room. The cabin itself seems to rest peacefully within its sturdy walls. Outside, the snow continues to cover the land. Inside, the combined wisdom gathered from many winters continues protecting the family through the final hours before dawn. Your eyelids grow heavier. The embers dim further in the hearth, and the long frontier night begins slowly giving way to the first faint hints of morning. Soon the light of a new day will arrive. With it will come small comforts that mean far more here than they might anywhere else. Simple things, a stronger fire, a warm drink, a thicker quilt pulled over tired shoulders, the quiet luxuries that transform a cold frontier night into something survivable. The night has grown deep and slow inside the cabin. The frost rests along the window, the embers glow faintly beneath their ash, and the sleepers remain wrapped in their quilts and furs. Outside, the snow lies thick across the clearing, softening every sound and smoothing the rough edges of the frontier landscape. These quiet hours before dawn are often the coldest. You feel it faintly now in the air above the blankets. The warmth beneath your quilt still surrounds your body, but the room itself carries a sharper chill than it did earlier. It's in the evening. The fire has nearly finished its long work through the night, leaving only a bed of dim coals glowing in the hearth. Yet even in this coldish moment, a few small comforts remain. On the frontier, the difference between a difficult night and a tolerable one often depended on the simplest details. A thicker quilt, a better stack of firewood, a door that closes tightly against the wind. You pull the quilt closer around your shoulders and feel its weight pressed gently against your chest. The warmth trapped beneath the layers continues holding steady despite the cooler air beyond the blanket. Across the room, the rope bed creaks softly as one of the sleepers turns. The fur covering their legs shifts slightly before settling again. The children on their pallets remain bundled beneath their blanket, their small shapes nearly hidden within the folds of fabric. A well-documented reality of frontier life is that many families worked hard to gather small comforts wherever they could. Even modest improvements to bedding or heating could transform long winter nights into something far more manageable. Extra blankets sewn during the autumn, a supply of hardwood stacked carefully near the cabin, animal skin preserved after a successful hunt. Each item added another layer of protection against the cold. You glance toward the hearth again. The embers glow faintly now, but they still hold enough life to relight the fire once morning arrives. The father arranged them carefully before going to bed, and that quiet preparation ensures the family will not wake to a completely cold hearth. That small advantage matters more than it might seem. Another interesting observation recorded in several pioneer recollections describes how families sometimes treasured a particularly warm quilt as one of their most valuable household possessions. A well-made quilt could last for many years and provide comfort through countless winters. Such items were often treated with great care. You imagine the quilt covering you now, having served this cabin through many seasons. Perhaps it was stitched by hand during an earlier winter when the snow kept everyone indoors. The fabric squares might once have belonged to shirts, dresses, or coats that wore thin from years of use. Now they work together as a single blanket guarding against the cold. Across the cabin, the tools near the door remain untouched. The axe rests quietly against the wall. The lantern waits beside the hearth. The boots remain ready near the rope bed. These simple objects form part of the household's quiet security through the night. Researchers who study daily life in early settlements sometimes note how settlers placed enormous value on practical possessions that improved comfort or safety. In isolated homes where replacement items could be difficult to obtain, even small improvements carried lasting importance. A warmer blanket, a sturdier door latch, a stronger pair of boots, each contributed to survival. Outside the cabin, the snow continues resting across the frozen ground. The forest stands silent beneath its white covering, and the sky above remains dark except for scattered stars fading slowly toward the horizon. Inside, the warmth beneath the quilts holds steady. You feel the straw mattress rustle softly as you shift into a slightly more comfortable position. The cabin remains quiet. The sleepers breathe slowly. The embers pulse faintly within the hearth. These final hours of the night often bring a strange mixture of cold and comfort. The fire has nearly faded, yet the quilts remain warm. The air grows sharper, yet the cabin still shelters everyone within its walls. Small comforts continue doing their work. Your breathing slows further as sleep deepens. The long frontier night approaches its final moments. Soon the eastern sky will begin to pale. Morning will return light to the cabin and bring new warmth to the hearth. But for now, the night remains peaceful. The quilts hold their warmth. The snow rests quietly outside, and the small comforts gathered through careful work continue guarding the sleepers through the final stretch before dawn. Soon the quiet darkness will soften. Soon the world will begin to wake, and the frontier night will finally release its hold. The night has nearly reached its end. Inside the cabin, the embers in the hearth glow faintly like small red stars buried beneath the ash. The sleepers remain wrapped in their quilts and furs, their breathing slow and steady in the quiet air. Outside, the snow rests peacefully across the clearing, smoothing the land beneath a pale sky that has begun its slow transformation toward morning. You sense the change even before the light appears. The darkness feels thinner now, less absolute than it was earlier in the night. Somewhere beyond the forest, the first hint of dawn prepares to rise. For frontier families, these final hours before sunrise often carried a strange stillness. The fire burned low. The air inside the cabin felt cooler, and the long stretch of darkness had done its quiet work. Yet beneath the blankets, warmth still held. You lie beneath the quilt and feel the gentle heat surrounding your body. The straw mattress supports you with its familiar rustle, and the heavy fabric of the blanket rests comfortably across your shoulders. Across the room, the rope bed creaks softly as one of the sleepers turns. The children remain tucked together beneath their blanket, their small shapes barely visible in the dim light. This was the reality of many winter nights on the American frontier. Families slept not in perfect comfort, but in careful balance with the cold around them. Firebedding clothing and shared warmth combined to create a fragile but effective system that allowed rest to happen even in harsh conditions. Over time, these practices became second nature. Each winter taught new lessons. Each season added small improvements to the way cabins were built, fires were managed, and beds were prepared. The knowledge passed quietly from one household to another and from one generation to the next. Outside the cabin now, the snow reflects the faintest trace of early light. The forest begins to separate itself from the darkness as outlines of trees slowly emerge against the sky. Inside, the frost along the window still glimmers faintly. The embers in the hearth continue their slow-fading glow. Soon someone will... Boots will slide onto the wooden floor. The poker will stir the ashes until fresh flames rise once again. Morning will begin, but for this moment the cabin remains suspended in peaceful quiet. The night that once felt so long and cold now softens as dawn approaches. The quilts still hold their warmth. The logs of the cabin stand firm against the winter air. The snow rests gently against the walls like a silent guardian, and you feel the calm that comes from knowing the night has been endured successfully. Now the pace of the story slows. The darkness grows softer. The quiet becomes deeper. You take a slow breath beneath the quilt and notice how peaceful the room feels. The sounds that once filled the night have faded into gentle silence. The wind outside has settled. The animals in the barn remain still. Even the forest itself seems to be resting before the day begins. The warmth beneath your blanket continues to hold you comfortably. Your body sinks deeper into the mattress. Your thoughts begin to drift slowly like snowflakes settling across a quiet field. Imagine the cabin now from above, a small shelter resting in a wide snowy landscape. Smoke will soon rise again from its chimney. Light will return to its window. But for this final moment before dawn, it simply rests, safe, warm. Still, the long frontier night has done its work. The cold pressed against the walls. The fire glowed quietly in the hearth. The quilts guarded their warmth, and the family inside slept through it all. Now the sky grows lighter. Morning approaches slowly, gently, without hurry. The cabin will wake soon, but you can remain here in this peaceful moment just a little longer. Let the quiet hold you. Let the warmth remain around you. Let the soft rhythm of the frontier night fade gently into rest. Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams.